We recognize that the Hogan Administrative Center occupies the land of the Ho-Chunk people. Please take a moment to celebrate and honor this ancestral Ho-Chunk land and the sacred lands of all Indigenous peoples. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Baumann?
Here.
Ms. Berkedahl?
Here.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Here.
Dr. Garcia?
Here.
Dr. Jimenez?
Here.
Ms. Leahy?
Here.
Ms. Moots?
Excused.
Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Mr. Spivey?
Absent. A quorum of the Board of Education is present, so the regularly scheduled meeting of January 23rd, 2023 is called to order, and will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and face the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Tonight's agenda has previously been distributed to the board with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Cooper-Stoll. We will approve the agenda as submitted unless there is a motion to amend. Is there a motion to amend? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion has carried, and we'll move on to public speakers. It's the policy of the board to provide at its public meetings an opportunity for individuals to address the board. Comments about individual staff or personnel will not be allowed. Open meeting law prohibits the board from engaging in discussion or responding to matters not included on the agenda. All speakers are reminded that the same policy limits your time to speak to 5 minutes. This limit will be strictly enforced. If I could ask the superintendent to please keep track of the time and to notify the speaker when time is running out.
I will.
Thank you. You're also asked to give your name and the school district where you reside at the beginning of your time for the public record. Our first speaker tonight is Chris Woodard.
Chris Woodard, La Crosse School District. Good evening, all. Thank you for letting us have the opportunity to address you all. I'm Chris Woodard, a La Crosse City Council member, the chairman of the Washburn Neighborhood Association, a near neighbor of Lincoln Middle School, and a father of a child in the La Crosse School District. Moving into the Washburn neighborhood, Lincoln Middle School was something that grew on us and we had grown to appreciate. It's something within our neighborhood that many others wish they had. It encompasses everything La Crosse seeks to make right. It's been the host of many of our neighborhood meetings, the Garden Expo, and recently our very successful neighborhood night out. This plan to close Lincoln and start busing students across the city to other middle schools is not conducive to the city's climate action plan or to its comprehensive plan. Neighborhood schools are vital in our pursuit to raise successful students. With the closure, we would not only lose our neighborhood school, but we'd also lose the walkability that many love about that school. And I'll leave you with this. Spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel. Lincoln Middle School is the silk of that web of our neighborhood. And by taking away Lincoln Middle School, you're taking away that strength that our neighborhood has. It's just like taking a broom and sweeping out any cobweb. So I beg you guys to vote in a better way to seek a better option. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Angela Mankey. Angela?
Sorry. Oh, you're awake now. Good evening, members of the La Crosse School Board, Superintendent Engel, teachers, staff, students, parents, community members. My name is Angela Mankey, and I'm a proud parent of school district. Sorry, I'm supposed to start with that. Angela Mankey, School District of La Crosse. But I'm a proud parent of a current Lincoln middle schooler, and her name's Lexi, and a former Lincoln student, Ben, who's now a freshman at Central. And I'm also the chairperson of the Powell Polk Hamilton Neighborhood Association, which borders Washburn neighborhood, which Lincoln resides in. I just want to briefly take your time to not only talk to you about talk about this issue as a concerned parent, but also as a concerned neighbor, with the potential decision to close an important neighborhood school at Lincoln Middle. I understand that we need to be aware of our finances. I'm not oblivious to that fact. And it's important that we look at finances. However, it shouldn't be the only factor, because the price that we could be paying by rushing into a consolidation could cost us more than just dollars and cents. It could cause not only harm to our students' mental, physical, and educational health, but also significantly set back the economic and social health of our core neighborhoods. Our core neighborhoods of PPH, Washburn, and downtown, along with the various community partners, have been working very, very hard the last several years and committing significant dollars into revitalizing these neighborhoods in order to uplift and enrich the lives of our families and our residents that are living in these walkable neighborhoods. Again, key is walkable. A key component to this revitalization process is neighborhood schools. We've talked about this repeatedly over the years, particularly with our heart and soul at Hamilton Elementary. And these neighborhood schools provide a key resource to providing a foundational support to strengthening families, which in itself strengthens neighborhoods, which strengthens schools. It's a cycle. They work and feed off of each other. Schools and neighborhoods share a mission in strengthening and building relationships. We've all been talking about relationship building, and these relationships will extend far beyond the next fiscal cycle. So, our city planning sees how important this is. They've been working with us continuously as neighborhood associations the last few years and strengthening our neighborhoods. Because again, the strength of our city is based on our neighborhoods. And this collaboration has been through city, with health systems, with city employers, with universities. And speaking of, in Lincoln, you have all of those. You have two major systems, health systems. You have two universities. You have a whole host of a growing downtown with employers who would love their employees to walk to work. And how do you build up a neighborhood in order to entice employers is to provide walkability, to provide schools, to provide access to food, and all these things. And we're growing that in the PPH and Washburn neighborhoods. But by taking away now this key factor of the school, you're not only affecting your students, you're affecting generations to come in those neighborhoods. And that's going to cause further detriment to the city core. So if we want to improve our schools, we have to look at all of our neighborhoods. And this is a very, very vital neighborhood right now, or set of neighborhoods right now that are really trying to enrich the lives of some of our most vulnerable members of the community. So again, bringing this back to the cost is we can look at the dollars and cents, and I was at a meeting last week where they talked about the dollars and cents, but what is the true cost beyond just what you've shown us on paper? I don't think we're looking at the full cost beyond just the revenue cycle. We have to look at collaborations with other systems to see, can we find another way to save Lincoln, to save our schools, to save our neighborhood schools, so that we can continue to grow as a city, so that we're stronger. So I'm just asking you to kind of pump the brakes on this. I know time is of the essence, but if we do this wrong, we're causing irreparable harm to our students, to our neighborhoods, to our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Vicki Markison.
Good evening. Thank you for having this listening session. I am Vicki Markison, and I am in the La Crosse School District. I'm here kind of as a has-been mom. I'm here representing who will eventually live in my home because my children, two of the boys attended Lincoln Middle School. So I am here representing who will eventually have middle school students in my home, and I'm in the Wygant-Hogan neighborhood. I'm here to speak on the consolidation of the middle school, but I think some of these comments will also apply to the upcoming referendum. I will admit that it's challenging to speak here because it's a pretty vague agenda item. There's not a lot of information on this. The referendum has some blanks in there, so it's hard to address what exactly is going to be voted on, but it can be assumed that in the near future, the consolidation, if not tonight, will be voted on. But I can guarantee you some of the people attending information sessions this week would be surprised if this does get voted on today because they were given the impression that it may not be. And here's my point. This vote should not be a surprise to the taxpayers. There needs to be clear communication as to the direction, and particularly I think it is important to note the timing. We're coming off of a referendum where the public is looking for you to restore their trust, and that trust comes from seeing how you react and how you engage the public. They want to be engaged, and by slowing down on the middle school consolidation, it allows you to focus on that upcoming referendum, which I know likely needs to get voted on tonight. They can focus on that referendum and not on the emotions of consolidating schools, if that is what you are voting for this evening. It's critical as we move forward. Forward is the only path. We do have to be working together. That trust is a critical component. It's involved in the consolidation of our schools. It's involved in asking the taxpayers for additional dollars to help with the budget issues that you face. And I think if you can hold off on the middle school vote, it puts you in a better position to re-engage the public and build their trust on that referendum. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deb Sukla.
My name is Deb Sukla. I live at 3147 Losey Boulevard South, Crosse, Wisconsin. I was a member of this Board of Education from 2001 through 2018. Since I was on this board longer than most of you, or perhaps all of you, I'd like to share a history lesson. Early on in my time on the board, we put out a referendum proposal to close 5 elementary schools and build 2 new elementary school buildings and make some improvements in some of the other buildings. We didn't engage the public. We thought it was a great idea, and not surprisingly, it failed. When we reconvened after the failed referendum, we took time to reflect on what our community told us. What they told us is they believed in investing in our buildings. So we put together another referendum proposal to put HVAC in our buildings and to add a number of safety features into our buildings. And not surprisingly, it passed pretty easily. We continued to talk to our public about what did they want in our schools and our school buildings, and we listened to the public. We were transparent with what we did. A few years later, after a number of public input sessions, we put together another referendum proposal to close 2 Northside schools and build what is now known as the Northside Elementary. Obviously, it passed. And that referendum was successful because we were transparent. We listened to the public. We did what the public told us to do. Your job as school board members is to be your connection of the public and the citizens of this community with our education. And I've heard it before, but our job is not to rubber stamp what administration puts together. Your job is to listen to the public. Now at your meeting tonight, you're going to consider consolidation of middle schools after not very much public engagement at all. You had a public input session at the one building that was going to be closed. That's not a good way to show your community that you're listening to us or that you're being highly transparent. Now, I will say, talking about middle schools was an issue that was hugely important to me at this table, because as you know, all 3 of our all 3 of our middle schools, 100%, are at or nearing 100 years old. I talked about that. Brad can tell you many times at board tables, so I'm glad you're talking about it, but this isn't the way to do it. You should be, and closing a middle school that is one of our most vulnerable neighborhoods is not the conversation you should be having when talking about middle schools. School districts have an obligation to invest in our most vulnerable neighborhoods, not take resources away. This is a rush to judgment. In a few short months, 4 of your 9 seats, nearly half of you, will be new people and new voices, and they need to be heard. And when you add on the conversation you're going to be having about a referendum for operating funds, those voices of nearly half your board are not here to be at this table. You're making long-term decisions with short-term members. I agree this community needs to invest in our buildings. It is true you are facing a financial problem because of the declining enrollment and, of course, the needs of a growing number of low-income students. But the way you're going about it seems a little tone-deaf to our community. You can solve financial problems by cutting costs until you cut into the bone, or you can generate new customers. At one time, I don't know if it still is, one of the goals of this body was to be the school district of choice in the area. It should still be a goal. It should be still something you're working on. Why are students leaving this district and going to other communities? What can this district do about it? There's no reason that this isn't the school district of choice. But then again, why would families keep their children in a school district that doesn't seem to listen to them? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's time this board and this administration realize that you need to listen to the community and be transparent about it. It's time you pause and do true public engagement. I urge you not to take action tonight on the middle school consolidation or the operating referendum. Our community has a lot to say about our schools, as you heard last fall, and you need to listen to us. And as one of the speakers said, please do not do any irreparable harm to our district. Thank you.
We'll move on to the superintendent's consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? Second. The consent agenda is a mechanism that is used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. Are there any items that the members want to remove from the consent agenda? Hearing none, with a motion by Mr. Korberg and a second by Dr. Cooper-Stoll, the items on the superintendent's consent agenda are approved as presented unless there is a motion to object. Is there a motion to object? Hearing none, then we'll move on to the approval of the board consent agenda. Is there a motion?
And I'll make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? Second. Moved by Mr. Korberg and a second by Ms. Birkedahl. We will approve the items on the board consent agenda unless the members want to remove anything from the board consent agenda first. Okay. Is there any objection to approving the items on the board consent agenda? Hearing none, then those are all approved, and we'll move on to the information portion, which is Results Monitoring Report 3.1, Involved Citizenship, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
So monitoring our policies is a crucial part of our coherent governance process, and we have Dr. Lahaki here to present on our 3.1.
Thank you. Results Policy 3.1. Students will understand and exercise the rights and responsibilities of citizenship in our democratic society. There are two indicators. One is the civic responsibility aspect of the Wisconsin Forward exam that we take in grades 4, 8, and 10 from last spring. And the second is student voter registration. So both have been marked as making reasonable progress. If I would direct you to the summary page where we can look at some of our history. This is an interesting time because when we take our look back, we could see pre-pandemic data and then compare it to our data last spring. In the area of civic responsibility in grade 4, we had 56.1% of our students at proficient and advanced in this area. In 2022, we've actually increased from pre-pandemic 61.9%. Which is above the state average at 61.4. One thing I would say about this data, though, is this is our first assessment using the new social studies standards that we've been working on the last few years. So we'll have to see how this plays out as far as the rigor of the particular standards and how the tests work. But from initial indications, we are on the right track, I believe. It's up from last year. We were at 44.7% proficient and advanced, so a jump of about 16%. We do have some prevalent gaps that are persistent in many of the areas, though. That would be an opportunity for improvement. In 8th grade, this was our softest data when it came to the Wisconsin Forward. you could see in pre-pandemic 2019, we had 49.1%. We did increase that to 50.9, so we did see improvement, but not as much as the state improved. So 8th grade, we were a bit low. And that'll be an area, we do have some sampler questions that we're looking at to figure out what we could maybe do differently this particular spring. In 10th grade, in 2019, we're at 44.3% proficient in advanced, and that number grew to 54%, which is above the state average. The state was at 49.4. So we did see some nice growth from even pre-pandemic. We're seeing growth in the area of civic responsibility. And then if you combine all three areas together, or grade levels, I should say, 4th, 8th, and 10th, which are the grades that take the Wisconsin forward in the area of social studies, you can see we're just below the state average. So that 8th grade data held us back just a little bit, but it's still higher than pre-pandemic in 2019 and significantly higher than last year. So good growth in the last year. We did, if you notice in 2022, we did have a number of our reference groups above the state average. So we did see that closing the gaps that we're looking for as well. Are there any questions about the first indicator?
Any questions from the board members? Nope. Okay, we can move on then.
Indicator 2 is student voter registration. Now, candidly, this is repackaging data that you've actually seen before. I presented this in August because when we changed the timing of our results policies, our results 3 policies, it's like a greatest hits. It's coming back. But what I tried to do is add some context. That was the new language that was added to this indicator, was shows favorable or favorably, let me look at the exact wording here. The percentage of eligible high school students that have registered to vote will favorably reflect overall voting trends. Because we know from year to year there's going to be some fluctuation based on the interest in a particular year's topic when it comes to election. So if you look at last year, we were at 24%, 66 of 275. And you might wonder, well, we have more than that in our senior class. Well, we actually do a cutoff of April 5th or whenever the election is, and then run a report, and then take that report and run it through the county registration. So we go one by one. So we have very accurate results. So we do have 24% of our students that were 18 by the time of the spring election, right? And that's important to keep in mind when I talk about some of the context when you look at the next piece of data to have in the back of your mind. The Wisconsin Election Commission gives us a group range. So you can see in 2020-21, we had 360,216 people registered to vote within that grade band. So, and then you can see, well, we dropped approximately 80,000 in that next year. Makes sense, right? When we had a presidential election, that's going to always drive turnout a little bit more. This year, maybe in the fall, we had a school referendum to build a new high school. That might have drawn out more voters this fall. Then again, how many of our seniors were 18 by the November election? So we'll see how that plays out. But it's good to have the context, I think, of the voter registration rates of the previous years as that context of how are we doing in compared to the rest of the state. So the state went down 80,000, we went down 1.1%. So it was almost flat, which to me is a good turnout locally. To give you, I did go back a few other years just to give you an idea of what to expect. In April of 2020, which would have been the 2019-20 year, it was 286,000. April of 2019, which would have been 2018-19, it was 291,000. So that presidential election of 2020 really drove out the vote significantly compared to most years. Also keep in mind this is a grade band that we're looking at. Our 18-year-olds, this is their first crack at registering. As they turn 19 and 20 and 21 and 22, they have more opportunities to register, so we only get a fraction of that overall. To give context, I did a little bit of research, and there was a group called the Civic Center that provided the registration rates of all the school districts in Milwaukee County and Dane County. And you can see, out of Milwaukee and Dane County, we would have had the second highest number at 24% for this last election. Okay, so their methodology is significantly different than ours. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison in that they did their poll on January 3rd. And whereas we went student by student because we knew their birth dates and could eliminate, they had to use some census averages in that. So I don't know if this data will continue to be presented to you all. We're going to see just how valid and reliable it ends up being. But it was an extra piece of context that I thought might be helpful to share. And if this data fluctuates, it can help you determine reasonable progress or not. I think the better indicator, the more official one, will be that age range of 18 to 24 from the Wisconsin Election Commission. But this was interesting enough. I'm like, well, I thought the board might like to see this for what it's worth. Are there any questions about indicator 2?
Any questions from the board?
I appreciate the context.
One question I would have, Dr. Lahaki, is if we weren't to use the Wisconsin Election Commission or the Civic Center as models to measure against, is there anything else that would be a better predictor?
The last time I presented, I had no context. So this was an effort to try to provide some of that context. It's really hard to find data just for 18-year-olds. It always seems to be grade banded for whatever reason. We could look at national trends as well. We are going to be driven by some of our local influences, and the wording of the reasonable progress measure, I think, needs to be intentionally loose because we will have local things that come up. If we do have some sort of spring voting action for our community, it may generate more votes than if we just, let's say, have a circuit court judge and that's the only item on the ballot. So I think the more local we can get with this data for you to look at, I think you'll be able to make the best decision. I honestly don't know. When I look at the other school districts, student voter registration isn't one of their measures or indicators. It's generally surveys. And then some social studies, Wisconsin Forward. So we break it down by the category as well. I don't have a good answer here at the podium tonight. I can keep looking for more data. This is the best I had for tonight.
No, I mean, I think this was well done. I just was very curious about what else would be out there if there was anything that you knew of. But knowing that other schools don't use this as a measure and we're trying to find our way through it, I appreciate the context and the insight.
Right, and one thing that I look at is the school district of Greenfield is significantly above the other school districts. Mm-hmm. So that might be worth a call to see what are the proactive things that they do to help drive out student votes. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's like the actionable part of this data because I can't really influence the other school districts of what they're doing or not doing.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Dr. Lahaki. So from the board members, how are we feeling about our 3.1? And they were marked both as yes, we have made reasonable progress on indicators 1 and 2. Any thoughts from the board? Yeah.
I'm glad to see the closing of some of those gaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing the work to be done to help continue to close those gaps, but I think this shows that we are doing our due diligence and good work. So thank you very much, Dr. Lahaki. With that, we will move to 6.02, the quarterly budget report. I'll turn it over again to Dr. Engel.
I'll turn it right over to Ms. Smith.
So this report looks very familiar to you. We give you a monthly report every month, and at the quarterly mark, we go over this so that you pretty much understand it and can ask questions. So these are our revenues on the first page, and the following pages are the expenditures as of December 31st, 2022. And so we have a 2-year comparison, and some of the things that I'd like to point out to you is that our revenues at this point of the year are much less than our expenditures by about $21 million. And so that is how we emphasize that the importance of maintaining a healthy fund balance to avoid our short-term borrowing, which is very expensive when you think about having to borrow $20 million. Also, our fiscal year starts on July 1st. And our local taxes, our other state categorical aid, state equalization aid, those dollars don't come until January or later. And then, of course, our federal aids, our grants, are reimbursable. We have to spend those dollars first before we're reimbursed. So that just emphasizes that importance. So we compare year to year, and we are pretty much right on track at the same spending level as last year. You will notice that on other federal sources, where we have $505,000 that came in, and that is due to an emergency connectivity fund grant that our Director of Technology went ahead and applied for, and this had to do with more federal aid due to COVID and the connectivity of the remote learning. So that is helping offset our cost of our technology lease for this year. Anything else on that page? Any questions on revenues? Okay. We'll go to the next page, and that is our expenditures by type. By function or purpose. So we show you the expenditures in two different ways. One is by the function or purpose, and then the other is by object or type. So when you're comparing by function, you can see that our expenditures are very similar across the board, but then again, you can see it's $39 million of expenditures compared to that $19 million of revenue. So if you go line by line, you can see that some of those things have a very large budget expenditure, and yet some of those expenditures are not done until the end of the year, such as open enrollment or the vouchers. The building administration, that's the school's expenses, building operations and maintenance, that includes part of the funds that we spent out of ESSER for HVAC at Central. And then, of course, we have our non-employee insurance and consulting, our liability, property, workers' comp, unemployment taxes. Any questions anywhere on that?
Just curious about summer school, how we've already incurred 58% of the expenses for the year on that.
Our summer school starts in the prior summer. So our summer school is part of this fiscal year that took place last summer.
Okay.
And then June will be also added to this. So any summer school expense in June will be included in this fiscal year. Okay? So then our expenditures by type or object. So this really gives you a great indication that if you look at base salaries, that indicates we are a service industry. 80% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So when you talk about cutting a budget, you're talking about cutting personnel. So this gives you a good indication that we've already spent $20 million just in base salaries alone at this point of the year. And like I said, we've only brought in $19 million. So that is why we have to use that fund balance and keep it healthy. We had some savings with health insurance. We went to a narrower network. So you can see that the budget and the expenditures are less than they were last year. So utilities, we are, comparatively at this time of year, we're down, but we have a lot of winter yet to go. So we can see how that ends up at the end of the year. Let's see. And then again, we have our building improvements. That includes that HVAC funded through ESSER. But then again, our expenditures are very comparable from year to year. So a good indication are these charts on the next pages, because the cash flow, as you can see, the revenues and the revenues are in the blue, and they're very comparable year to year, and so are our expenditures. but look at the distance between those, and that's substantial. Then when you look at the chart for the operating revenue, you can kind of see that we're spending the dollars in the same places as we have from year to year. So we have been consistent. Operating expenditures by program, same thing. Those colors indicate where we're spending our dollars, and at this time of year, we are right on track. And that's the same for operating expenditures by type. So that's a good visual. Any questions?
Questions from the board members?
Not a question, I just really like the visual.
You like the visual? Yeah.
It does make it a little simpler to be able to understand. Other comments or questions?
I think it highlights the concerns about dipping into that fund balance when we have to take monies out of that in order to meet other needs, because it can't come from anywhere else. And not only does it impact our ability in the short term at times, but can in fact affect our credit rating and other things we need in terms of being good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
I think it also highlights the idea that the fund balance is not for recurring items. It is usually one-time expenses that are emergent. And if we were to use the fund balance for recurring items, we would be in a very challenging spot financially. Any other comments or questions on the budget report for the quarter? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much. We'll move on to 6.03, the Operational Expectation Monitoring Report, OE6, Financial Administration. This is just an opportunity for us to discuss if there are any things that we wanted to review in regards to the language on OE6, Financial Administration. I don't think we had any, and the administration does not either. So then we will leave OE6 alone as it is, and we'll move on to 6.04, Financial Outlook and Long-Range Facility Planning. Just for the board members to know, the reason I put this on here so we wouldn't have to deal with Robert's Rule of Order and having to make a motion and second, and then if we need to make an adjustment to that motion, having to make amendments and voting, and it just gets complicated when there's a topic like this at hand. And so if we do it under information, that allows a good free flow of communication without having to worry about that. So that is why it is added here under information. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
I've got a recommendation regarding the referendum, and I'll read through the handout I gave you, and I believe it should be available on board docs as well. So the recommendation to the school board by the superintendent is to add a non-recurring operational referendum to the April 2023 ballot. Should be 2 packets of paper there for folks. The recommendation is for a referendum extending 6 years, totaling $55.5 million, with an estimated annual mill rate impact of 17 cents. The first year would see a levy of $5.5 million, with a levy of $10 million in years 2 through 6. The referendum should address the previously identified needs from the last referendum campaign, which include deficit budgets due to declining enrollment and aging buildings, the continuous engagement with the community for the last 2 years through the long-range facility plan development and previous referendum process provide the foundation for this recommendation. This approach will continue the existing programming covered by the current referendum when it expires. The additional revenue will allow the school district to maintain key classroom supports for student behavior and mental health, invest in deferred maintenance to address our most crucial accessibility and instructional needs, attract and retain staff, and address part of the district's budget deficit to avoid damaging cuts to personnel and programs. Projected deficits. In 2009, the state stopped providing inflationary revenue increases to school districts. The result has been a devastating loss of revenue for school districts. The graph below from the Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials shows the resulting change in revenue for school districts. For the school district of La Crosse, the result is a loss of over $19.2 million annually. $3,200 per pupil. In addition to ongoing underfunding of schools, the state provided little to no spendable revenue to schools over the last 2 years. As a result of ongoing declining enrollment and underfunding of schools, we can anticipate a significant budget deficit in the upcoming years. Assuming ongoing declining enrollment, averaging 80 students per year from the UW Applied Population Lab study, a minimal inflationary increase in expenses of 3%, and an increase in revenue from the state that is the average of the last 10 years, which works out to about $130 per student per year. The school district is facing a structural deficit that starts at $5 million and rises to $10.1 million over 6 years. The cumulative 6-year impact, if unaddressed, is $45.8 million. The impact of letting this deficit go unaddressed are significant layoffs to staff, resulting in a loss of necessary supports to students, the loss of operating funds necessary to make payroll, and avoid the costs of short-term borrowing. A referendum will help maintain the crucial mental health supports and behavior and academic supports our kids need to thrive. It will help replace the loss of ESSER funding, which will remove the funding for these essential supports that students and families rely on. A referendum will also allow the district to keep high-quality classroom teachers in La Crosse, as well as the impactful specialists and support staff who make La Crosse the best place to learn. Aging buildings. The district has aging facilities that are in need of significant improvements, as outlined in the capital maintenance handbook. The buildings where there is the greatest need is our middle schools. The middle schools are all over 80 years old and have over $16 million in maintenance issues identified. On a per capita basis, the Lincoln, Logan, and Longfellow middle schools rank 1, 2, and 3 in maintenance costs per capita out of all of our school buildings. The aging middle schools need significant maintenance simply to meet today's basic standards for accessibility and instruction. These improvements include accessible bathrooms to meet ADA requirements, safe labs and shop classes, modernizing classroom amenities, fencing for security, replacing original furniture, LED lighting to reduce costs and improve well-being, and safe bus drop-off sites for families. Declining enrollment. The district has seen a reduction in enrollment by 1,792 students since 2001, 23% fewer students. The graph below shows the enrollment in the school district of La Crosse since the 2017-2018 school year, and this is found on the Department of Public Instruction website. A population study conducted for the school district by the UW Applied Population Lab shows that declining enrollment is highly likely to continue for the foreseeable future due to lower birth rates. As a result, there's an anticipated district-wide loss of enrollment of 800 to 900 students over the next 8 years. Schools are funded on a per-pupil basis, so along with a decline in enrollment, the district has experienced a decline in funding as well. The district has essentially the same physical space currently as was available in 2001, so a secondary outcome of declining enrollment is fewer students in school buildings and greater inefficiency. Based on our schools' student capacities, the current average utilization rate for our elementary schools is 70%, and for high schools it is 60%. The middle schools have the lowest utilization rate at 47%, and we anticipate a continued decline in enrollment at the middle school level of 160 to 280 students over the next 8 years. It is crucial that the district right-size facilities to provide a high-quality education and efficiently use our resources. Right-sizing will provide a better education for students by creating equitable opportunities, more full-time staff available in buildings to provide consistent access to services, and better working conditions that will attract and retain staff. While the recommended referendum will go a long way to addressing the budget deficit, right-sizing our facility footprint also provides the efficiencies necessary to balance the budget. As an example, consolidating the 2 middle schools will reduce the annual budget deficit by $1.5 million in the first year. Referendum structure and impact. The recommended referendum would be structured over 6 years to address the immediate needs of the school district next year, as well as replace the existing non-recurring operational referendum that ends after the 2023-2024 school year. The graph below helps visually explain the referendum amounts over the following 6 years. And the mill rate in the school district of La Crosse has decreased substantially since 2013, dropping over $5 per $1,000 of property value. The impact of this recommended referendum would be 17 cents per $1,000 of property value. The graph there shows what that increase looks like relative to the last period of time. So that is my recommendation as it relates to referendum. Happy to engage with any questions that folks might have.
Questions from the board members?
Are there any changes that were there have been any changes to this than were previously discussed?
No significant changes from our workshop, just additional information and context provided as we've been able to get out and talk to school groups and staff and folks. There's been a lot of interest about, what's the right dollar amount to provide the necessary funding for schools and balancing that naturally against what our community can afford.
So I think it's important to acknowledge tonight that this is the last possible day for an April referendum that we can consider this. So delaying would have costs to our district that we would experience next year. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. By law, a referendum must be put in place 75 days prior to the election, or 70 days prior. And so today is the last day to make a decision on a referendum for the April election.
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that this is an extremely fast turnaround because we are desperately trying to keep the services that we have. Also, and I pushed for this in the workshop, and I'll say it again, I think we should go for more. And this pairs with the middle school consolidation considerations, and I think delaying a closure for a year would benefit our students and our community. And looking at that mill rate graph just reinforces my personal feelings of it makes sense to ask for more in a time of great need, and also a time where we're going to be making decisions that really change the fabric of our neighborhoods and our district. I don't know what that number would look like since we don't deal with that kind of minutiae, so, but that's where I sit.
Yeah, as we've discussed before, each $1 million would be about another 17 cents on the mill rate. Each $500,000 would be about 7 to 8 cents. So those are kind of the numbers that we're looking at as we think about, if it's another $500,000 or another $1 million on top of that.
For a year?
Annually for the length of the referendum, as it's currently structured. There's ways to step it and do other things, but I think consistent and more direct sorts of messaging like this will be easier for our community to understand as we move forward. So whether it's $5.5 million the first year or 6 or 6.5, I think those are all reasonable things to discuss and debate.
So tonight, as we discuss those numbers, do you have the tangible impact of those increases, what that would mean in terms of people and services? Just so we know what that is. Because, just personally, millions of dollars increase, decrease, without knowing what this means for how people would experience it in the buildings. It's hard for me to feel like I can even have a conversation about those differences without knowing that.
Yeah, there's two ways to look at it. There's to talk about what wouldn't be there, if we didn't have access to that, and what new dollars could provide. One of those things is the ability to attract and retain staff in a really challenging environment. In some cases, we're competing with a single qualified teacher with multiple districts to be able to try and move them into our school district as opposed to a neighboring one. There are certain positions that we're just not able to fill because we can't provide an attractive salary with the resources we have available. Some really key folks that do really important work, whether it's school psychologists, speech pathologists, interpretation, maybe physics teachers and other things. There's cases where we can't even find a qualified person. And so having the ability to do a little bit more and impact all of our staff to keep them here in La Crosse would go a long way to creating a strong, viable future for our students. And then there's programs that we would love to double down on or continue once our ESSER funding runs out. As a part of this referendum, we'd be able to keep about half of what we had done historically over the last couple of years, but it wouldn't maintain everything that we had. And so being able to provide supports in buildings for mental health and behavioral health, to extend our student family assistance program that will run out with the end of Project Aware, being able to extend our graduation programs to help kids that need unique things to get across the finish line would be hugely beneficial. So there is certainly a strong case for increasing the amount and being able to do more for students every single day.
I don't want to say, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I don't want to say a repeat of what we had to go through last summer with having teachers come in and plead their case, because we all agree, we were sitting there agreeing with them. So I want to make sure that we have enough money to answer that as one of the things, because that's the quality that our kids are going to get. And to me, that's important. I'm kind of agreeing with Ms. Baumann as far as maybe the trade might be going up higher for an ask, and pumping the brakes on consolidation for a year possibly. And maybe there's something that can be done with some creative ideas. I know the numbers that we see in your next report are, kind of looks like, I don't know how things can change, but that might be an alternative.
Do we have a sense of what the next level, if we wanted to be sure that we had enough money in the referendum to address some of the questions like Brad was saying with teacher salaries and stuff next year? Do we have a sense of what the next step up would be, or the next step?
Yeah, I mean, in our budget deficit projections, we're looking at 3% increases in expenses, which includes salary and benefits.
So that's what this accounts for, right? Okay. So if we wanted to cushion that, given the rate of inflation and the lack of step increases, we would want to ask for what you were saying before, the 17 cents per 1 million, and it's about 680,000 for a 1% increase. Is that right?
It's right around there, yes.
Close to that? Okay.
Yeah, the inflation for bargaining units on July 1st was set just recently, and it's at 8%. So that was the inflation that our staff and our bargaining units experienced over the last year, and all of our community members did. You can obviously see it when you go purchase eggs or milk, or gas was high for a long time as well. Everyone in our community has experienced that same rate of inflation, and I think every organization wants to do as much as they can to attract and retain folks and ensure that they've got a solid living wage.
Well, and I don't think we are expecting much from the state. The state legislature in the last 10 years, I'm looking at a chart here, has not given any increases in 4 of those 10 years, and then minimal for the other years. And as we mentioned, it's about a $3,200 per pupil. Had the state been keeping up with inflation at all. So that's the crapshoot as far as what the state's going to be offering. And we heard the governor, what he said to the convention on Friday, but I don't think it'll go that high. So I think we can expect a little bit, but not much.
Yeah, we took, part of our expectations through school board policy is to use conservative estimates as we move forward. And so taking the average of the last 10 years, that $130 per student per year is a conservative estimate. It looks backwards and looks at what has been done. We're hopeful that it is larger, and we could, in turn use that for good things in our school district. One of the challenges of this whole process, as we've discussed before, is the timing of it all. We have to make referendum decisions, in this case in April or often in November, when the state biennium happens every 2 years and isn't wrapped up until July 1st at best. If we're going to make good program decisions about our schools, we want to be doing that in January and February. When we're hiring in school districts, you want to be doing that in March and April, and you have to do all of that before you even know what the state's going to give you for the next 2 years. And in some cases, like before 2009, it was pegged to CPI and it was consistent. In recent years, it's been a political decision, and if it was like 2011, we might lose $600 per student. So it's been a variety of things over the years, and it's unpredictable, and so we approach things pretty conservatively when we're talking through some of this stuff, making projections.
I would say I agree with wanting to increase, but also I think one of the questions that I have in my head is what is the bottom, like what is the number that we really truly need? Like if we're gonna say, let's make sure we meet that 8% increase. If we're gonna say, let's make sure we keep our programs and make them still maintain their effectiveness and be able to also increase programming and equipment, et cetera, to this district, what would that actually look like?
I mean, if we were to guarantee an 8%, it'd be like another $4 million on top of this ask. And, I think the challenge of inflation is not only that it increases our costs, but it limits our community's ability to chip in, and this community is incredibly supportive of public education. It's clear, even when they're saying no, like we love public education, and so I have no doubt about that. But we do have to be realistic too about what our community can reasonably financially support. We've got folks that live on fixed incomes and in homes and are making it every day, but we also have just think about all of that. So I think that's like what the real world number would be, and it's good to like examine what that is. I think it would be hard for me to advocate for something quite that far, given all of the factors involved. Not that we don't appreciate our staff and want to do that for them.
And the reason I ask that is because I think that people need to understand that to effectively and truly be able to sustain where we're at and also be able to enhance where we want to go as a district, the things that we're asking is really not even enough. That's just scratching the surface, right? And the reality too is that the state has a lot to do with this. And so there's advocacy pieces from the state. There's other pieces. Personally, for me, I feel like we're at the state where we can't continue to do school in a traditional sense and the way we've done school for so many years. Like, it's time for us to start thinking and examining new and innovative ways in which we can do this. But we're not there yet. I hope we get there soon. But I digress. You're gonna say something?
I think to have all the information, I'd like you to speak to, if it were increased and it's not supported, what are the consequences of a failed referendum this spring?
Yeah, that is the other side of the coin. So if we chose a number and maybe, or even this one, and the community couldn't support it, it would mean we wouldn't have access to $4.5 million for next school year. That's the first thing. And so we'd be looking at, limiting, compensation over the next year, and then looking for about $3.6 million in budget cuts in order to balance the budget. And
which I think, again, highlights the fact that because school districts, 80% of the budget has to do with our people. That's what we're in the business of, is educating others. That leaves such a small window with which to cut. So to take that amount of money out of that would have a devastating impact.
It'd be about 35 to 40 positions, across our school district. If 80% of that is salary and benefits, that would be 30, 35 positions across our school district that we'd be looking at reducing, which would impact every corner of our school district. Every student would be impacted in some way, in a negative way. The secondary impact is we wouldn't have kind of renewed the existing referendum that we have. So part of this proposal, this referendum, we have a referendum that comes up at the end of 23-24. This would extend that plus add to it. There's still an opportunity to go to referendum in 2020 24 to extend that. So we'd have another opportunity in April. There's no November election this year, but there would be an opportunity in April to go to referendum again to attempt to renew that referendum and add to it. And then at the very latest, one could conceivably go in November of that year, 24, for the existing school year. But that would be, we would have to have made cuts and everything else by that point because it would be 6 months down the road. We'd be taking a huge gamble if we didn't. And the cost of not renewing that referendum is $4.1 million. So that would be another $4.1 million we would have to cut out of our budget to balance it. And I can't even contemplate how awful that would be.
I mean, that's my concern. It's just such high stakes.
And I agree, but I also do wonder if going up even slightly, for me, it's the buffer time with a school closure. That, like, acknowledging that 47% utilization rate in a middle school is incredibly low. And like acknowledging that, population trends have changed. Our footprint is the same since 2001 with all these changes, even at a loss to the neighborhood and a personal loss, like I accept reluctantly, like this is the trend. But the impact on such a short turnaround time for families and for staff, even though staff have been in discussion about what this will look like, it just seems when we've faced so much the last 3 years, like if we could add just a bit more buffer time for those people who are going to be most affected, then, a slight increase that doesn't, greatly affect the mill rate or wreck our chances at doing something to sustain what we have. To me, that seems like what I see as like a wise compromise between all the competing desires of wanting to keep what we have and increase, salaries by 20% or whatever, but also being realistic about what the voters would support. And I worry too, like closing a middle school abruptly and putting a referendum forward. Will our voters, and I hope they do, come out and support that referendum then?
Can you speak to how long the discussions around closure of Lincoln have been part of long-range facility plans and how long, what that discussion has been like?
Yeah, if you go to the way back time machine, I think in the late 90s it was even closed at one point, and then the decision was to turn that around and invest in HVAC, I think in the 97, 98 timeframe. So it's been on the docket for a very long time, generally speaking. In most recent history, in all of our long-range facility plans that we brought to focus groups 2 years ago, it involved the closure of Lincoln as a part of that process to consolidate to 2 middle schools, and any variety of other configurations after that. But in every one of those, it was a part of the conversations. Well, those weren't attended by everyone in our community, and it was a limited group, and that certainly wasn't the focus, but it has been a part of our very open discussions for a long time. When we went through the referendum process with the informational sessions, that topic came up at almost every single one. And it was something we addressed very openly, that in all of our long-range facility plans, Lincoln's closure was something that was likely to happen. And then when we put information up on our website and other places, it included that talking point as well. That doesn't necessarily alleviate some people's concerns if they haven't been a part of that process, and I certainly understand that.
Well, as we're talking, it's critical that we have a successful referendum, and it has to be this spring, because we can't wait until next spring, or we're talking about a skeleton staff and a skeleton what's left. And that would really be detrimental to the district. I
can go through my recommendation for the middle school now, just kind of wrap all of that into the discussion. It's intended to be holistic, so. This one's a little longer, so I apologize, folks.
Before you do that, am I right in thinking that this referendum accounts for the closure of Lincoln and the savings that we make on that, this budget deficit map that brings us together? So,
Yeah, these recommendations come together.
Right, so
And
if we
so
did-
if we don't close Lincoln, we would have to seek $1.5 million in budget savings elsewhere
or raise the referendum number
to offset
to
some
offset
portion of that or all of it.
Okay, I just want to be sure I understood.
Yep. The recommendation of the superintendent to the school board is to consolidate into 2 middle schools by closing Lincoln Middle School. This measure will create better instructional opportunities for students, increase access to critical supports for students, attract and retain staff through more full-time positions in single buildings, and significantly reduce the school district's budget deficit, avoiding significant cuts to staffing and programs for students. If consolidation is approved, the recommended boundary line for the 2 middle schools is the current high school boundary line, Ferry Street. This boundary line, along with the application of the current intra-district transfer rule for high schools to the middle schools, the 45-55 enrollment management plan, will result in the greatest number of students who are within 2 miles of their assigned middle school and address school enrollment balance. It is with those students, families, and staff impacted that this recommendation is made humbly and with every intent to mitigate the effects on those that will feel the change the most. However, this plan is recommended as a less damaging alternative to cutting $1.5 million to programs for students, benefits for staff, and increasing class sizes. The continuous engagement with the community for the last 2 years through the long-range facility plan development and previous referendum process provide the foundation for this recommendation. I won't read the policies that guide this, but OE12 facilities, OE7 asset protection, 9800 retirement of facilities, and 4320 attendance boundary modification guidelines all discuss criteria that the school district administration must take into account when considering this idea. I'll skip down to the bottom of page 2, retirement of facilities analysis. Input from stakeholders. A middle school consolidation committee made up of school staff met regularly from November to January to identify, discuss, and evaluate critical elements of the middle school consolidation process. The most important elements to identify prior to consolidation announcement were school attendance boundaries and teacher assignment procedures. The committee identified key processes to put in place and key considerations for potential consolidation. The committee expressed competing views on consolidation. Some staff felt that a decision to close for next year would be best. Others felt waiting a year would be better, and some preferred to keep it open indefinitely. Input from an initial parent group meeting on January 18th regarding potential consolidation indicated a desire for knowing with certainty what was going to happen so they could plan as parents. And input from stakeholders regarding the preferred subsequent use of the site or property was initially garnered at a listening session on January 18th at Lincoln Middle School. Local neighborhood association members, immediate neighbors, local city council members, and the City of La Crosse Planning Department were invited to the meeting. The group provided a wide range of feedback to the administration present, most of it concerns. This feedback opportunity did not lead to identification of a preferred subsequent use for the site or property. Population trends and projected enrollment. These are the items that the board and administration policy require us to investigate as we consider this recommendation. A population study was conducted in 2020 using the Applied Population Lab at UW-Madison. District-wide enrollment has been on a downward trend for over 2 decades. We have seen a reduction in enrollment of 1,792 students since 2001. Declining enrollment is projected to continue for the foreseeable future due to lower birth rates. As a result, we anticipate a district-wide loss of enrollment of 800 to 900 students over the next 8 years. Enrollment in the 6th through 8th grade in 2022-23 is 1,257 students, a reduction of 115 students over the last 2 years. In 6th through 8th grades, all models project enrollment decreases. Enrollment projections for 5 years from now project a range of enrollment from 1,146 to 1,218. Declining enrollment has led to underutilization of buildings with the largest impact at the middle schools. Utilization rate at the elementary schools is 70%, high schools 61%, and middle schools 47%. Feasibility for alternative use or sale of the existing facility. Of the 3 middle schools, given the locations, capacities, age, and identified maintenance needs, Lincoln Middle School is the building identified to close if the middle schools consolidate from 3 to 2 buildings. The Lincoln Middle School building is over 100 years old and has substantial maintenance needs. The building has some historic character and historical importance to the city and the school district. The lot is located near downtown and less than a mile from Mayo and Gunderson Health Systems, Viterbo University, and UW-La Crosse. The saleability of the lot is high, while the alternative uses for the existing buildings are limited due to the significant amount of maintenance needed. Amount of disruption for reassignment of students to a different school. There are 208 students in 7th and 8th grade from Lincoln Middle School who would attend a different middle school with closure. This is projected for next year. There are 115 8th grade students at Lincoln Middle School, and they would not be impacted by the closure. There are 127 5th grade students who live within the Lincoln Middle School attendance boundary who would not attend Lincoln Middle School next year. Parents are certainly anticipating where their student will go to middle school. Counting current 6th and 7th graders, 14% of middle school students would be reassigned to a different school, and overall 3.5% of students in the school district would be reassigned to a different school with the closure of Lincoln Middle School. Proximity to school. Next year, if the current high school boundary is used to define the middle school attendance boundaries, an additional 135 students out of 323 enrolled at Lincoln Middle would be more than 2 miles from their assigned middle school, about 42% of those students. If the current high school boundary is used to define the middle school attendance boundary, of the 208 6th and 7th grade students currently enrolled at Lincoln Middle School, 72 live closer to Longfellow Middle School, and 7 live closer to Logan Middle School, 38% of students. Staffing costs and other efficiencies. Staffing savings that could be realized through consolidation total $1.8 million. These savings will phase in over time as we take advantage of natural attrition, which is why we anticipate a $1.5 million savings for next year. Eventually that will increase. Through a reduction of operational costs, another $130,392 is expected to be saved annually through the closure of Lincoln Middle School. And closing Lincoln Middle School will also save $889,295 in planned maintenance projects over the next 4 years and eliminate an additional $4.5 million in projected maintenance costs. The known 4-year staffing, maintenance, and operational savings of closing Lincoln Middle School are $8.4 million, which can be repurposed towards other needed maintenance programs for students and alleviating the school district's projected deficits. Impact of consolidation on the quality of instructional programs. The limited number of sections at each middle school building cause staff to be shared between buildings. Some positions are not able to be filled at the middle school level in due part to an increased number of necessary FTE to cover 3 buildings. This leads to a reduction in the time teachers are able to instruct students and a loss of programs at some schools, negatively impacting the quality of instructional programs. Consolidation of buildings will result in an improvement in the instructional program for students. Traveling and shared staff positions between 3 buildings result in students getting less access to teacher and specialists, like encore teachers, social workers, and mental health professionals when they need them. It is also harder to attract and retain staff that must be shared between buildings who have to travel. Teachers typically leave these positions as soon as possible, resulting in shared middle school staff that is less experienced and less able to effectively respond to students' needs. With underutilized middle schools, there are fewer staff members on hand to respond to incidents when they arise, and fewer staff to cover when a staff member is absent or unavailable. The low volume of staff in a building makes collaboration less effective and increases the burden on fewer individuals to operate and manage the schools. The net effect is a loss of support for students and an increase in the burden on staff. Consolidation will increase the number of teachers at each building, leading to stronger PLCs and collaboration that will have a positive impact on the quality of instructional programs. Anticipated major maintenance and capital expenditures. The latest capital maintenance and improvement book from April 2022 shows Lincoln Middle School has $5.4 million in needed maintenance, Logan Middle School $5.6 million in needed maintenance, and Longfellow Middle School has $6.2 million in needed maintenance. An analysis of ongoing maintenance needs, removing capital items, which are often gone to for referenda, shows the 3 middle schools have the highest per capita maintenance costs, with Lincoln Middle School ranking the highest. Lincoln and Logan Middle Schools have a per capita maintenance costs that are more than 30% higher than all other schools. Closure of Lincoln Middle School will save an anticipated $130,392 in annual operations costs. Closing Lincoln Middle School will also save $889,295 in planned maintenance projects over the next 4 years and eliminate an additional $4.5 million in projected maintenance costs. The known 4-year maintenance and operational savings of closing Lincoln Middle School are $1.4 million, which can be repurposed toward other buildings and programs for students. Physical location, the zoning of surrounding properties. The surrounding properties are zoned residential. The Imagine 2040 La Crosse downtown plan indicates that the area where Lincoln Middle School is located, quote, presents opportunities for increasing residential density in the study area while providing new housing options that are unavailable in the community. There's a picture there of the site from the county's GEIS website. Site size, the parcel Lincoln Middle School occupies is 2.07 acres in size. The Longfellow Middle School site is 4.33 acres, and the Logan Middle School site is 5.46 acres. Proximity to other schools with similar grade configurations. The distance from Lincoln Middle School to Longfellow Middle School is 1.13 miles. The distance from Lincoln Middle School to Logan Middle School is 2.56 miles. So that was an analysis of the buildings themselves. Secondarily, if there's going to be a building closure, there needs to be an assessment of the attendance boundaries. Our attendance boundary modification policy indicates the items that must be analyzed, and that is done here. Boundary changes must clearly be in the best long-term interests of the district in total. Aligning boundary lines for the middle schools to the existing high school boundary line will create clear pathways for students in 6th through 12th grade. This strategy will eliminate the disrupted relationships of students assigned to schools different from their friends at the high school grade levels, reduce the number of inter-district transfer requests, and increase the transparency of school assignments for parents. On the other hand, aligning boundary lines for the middle schools to existing elementary school boundaries will create clear pathways for students in kindergarten through 8th grade. This strategy will eliminate the disrupted relationships of students assigned to schools different from their friends at the middle school level, reduce the number of inter-district transfer requests, and increase the transparency of school assignments for parents. Boundary changes must maintain or improve the district's educational program. Consolidating the 2 middle schools will improve the educational program regardless of a reasonable boundary chosen. A clear path from elementary school to middle school to high school will have the greatest impact on improving the educational program by limiting the number of inter-district transfers and increasing stability for students and staff. Boundary changes must be demographically sound. The boundary changes options listed below indicate the percentage of students who would be assigned north and south and the resulting free and reduced lunch percentage. The resulting poverty rate of students attending Logan Middle School will be higher than those attending Longfellow Middle School, regardless of the boundary chosen. One additional boundary option was explored by our staff committee as well, a boundary that started with Ferry Street and also included the State Road Elementary Attendance Island and the Emerson Elementary boundary. This boundary had an enrollment count of 606 students going north and 647 going south, with a free and reduced lunch percentage of 57% north and 46% south. This option is the option identified by staff as the best balance of factors they considered. Boundary changes should be as permanent as possible. The most permanent change would be to align the middle school boundary to the existing high school boundary. Alignment with elementary boundaries, with elementary building consolidation potentially on the horizon, would result in boundaries that shift in the near future, causing additional disruption to parents. If students are moved, they should be moved in well-defined population areas. Both the high school boundary line and the existing elementary boundary lines are long-standing boundaries that are accepted by families. Despite a desire to identify well-defined population areas, there is a long history of choice in the school district, meaning that defined attendance boundaries mean less than they might otherwise. At the elementary level, 30% of students intra-district transfer to another school, not their neighborhood school. 19% of students at the middle school level intra-district transfer, and at the high school, 13% of students intra-district transfer, with nearly all the high school students going to Polytechnic or Logan High School, the result of the 45-55 rule. District transportation costs must be considered in any boundary change. Currently, 62 students at Lincoln Middle School would qualify for busing next year, meaning that they live more than 2 miles from school. With the current high school boundaries, an additional 153 students would live more than 2 miles from their assigned middle school. Estimating that 50% of students would take advantage of provided busing, one bus route would need to be repurposed from the existing plan. With the elementary boundary model, with Emerson Elementary students going north to Logan Middle School, 184 students would live more than 2 miles from their assigned middle school. Estimating that 50% of students would take advantage of provided busing, 2 bus routes would be needed to be repurposed from the existing plan. Given the increased efficiency of transportation under the middle school consolidation, the likely effect on transportation's costs is probably cost neutral to a minor decrease in costs. Distances, available transportation, and safety must be considered in any boundary change. Distances for student travel would change collectively the least if the current high school boundaries were selected. The second least change is the elementary boundary model that sends Emerson students to Logan Middle School. Other options explored would result in 71 to 95% of current Lincoln Middle School students eligible for transportation. Transportation staffing has been a challenge over the last 3 years, although it is much improved this year. Fewer bus routes is better than more, both for cost and staffing reasons. The busing efficiencies gained by consolidating the 2 middle schools would likely cover up to 2 routes. Safety would likely increase in any of these scenarios as the number of students provided busing would increase. And on the last page, there's a map of the elementary boundary lines, as well as the 45-15 line, which generally follows Ferry Street until it gets to the bluffs. So that's some additional context for the middle school conversation, and all of these things obviously intersect, and I think each of you has seen that.
So I would just say that I think I would be disheartened in the voters if the game of, well, if you close our middle school, we won't vote for your referendum was played. Because I think that that is a high detriment to students and staff and to this district. And I'm not saying that folks would do that, but I'm just putting that out there that if that was the tit for tat thing we were going to do, we would ultimately hurt this district more than any of these decisions being made right now. And I say all that to also say that, listen, I love Lincoln Middle School. I recognize the importance of Lincoln Middle School and the role that it plays in this community and the community that it's in. And we've also talked at great lengths about how consolidation needs to happen in this district for us to truly be able to be effective and successful. I can think of so many reasons, like if I sat here long enough, if you threw out a building that you said you wanted to have closed, I can give you millions of reasons as to why that building should not be closed. At the end of the day, if we're talking about trying to solve this urgent issue around cost and effectiveness and all of that, money, whatever you want to say, I think that we have to make some tough decisions. And I know for a fact that this conversation around closing Lincoln has been up and down. We brought it up, we tabled it, we put it off. You imagine being a teacher in that building, constantly hearing every year that your building's about to close. As a parent, constantly hearing every year that your building's about to close. At some point, you get a wall of saying either close it or don't bring it up anymore. And I think that we're there. And we have to make some tough decisions, and it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. But I think that if we're talking about doing what's best for this district, we just have to make some decisions.
When I think of the exceptional education my children had at Lincoln, it wasn't the building, it was the staff. And everyone who works there is fantastic, and they collaborate really well together. I'm interested to know how will we retain them, and how will we transition them into different buildings, different places in our district?
Yeah, we know that we have vacancies every year through attrition and retirement. And so our hope is that, by thoughtfully planning this at the right time, as early in this process as possible, we can keep as many of our staff within our school district as we can. One of the sources of anxiety for folks is, where am I going to teach next year? What job am I going to have? And so we've been working with our staff committee about what that would look like. We do have handbook language that talks about reassignment, it talks about seniority and those sorts of things, but it doesn't specifically account for the closure of a building. A lot of it talks about in your building. And so we've talked about a range of options, making all middle schools one building, in order to accommodate that. But there might also be a need to look at licensure up and down too. Middle school teachers are often licensed, either up to the high school or down to the elementary school. And so we want to be as fair as possible in this whole process. And we want to retain every teacher who's doing a great job for our kids. And so we'll be working very closely with staff to hammer out those specific details to ensure that everybody feels like they have input and say in where they're going to end up, and that everybody ends up in the best situation that we can possibly identify.
You got it.
How many staff do you estimate from Lincoln wouldn't have a natural move to Logan or Longfellow?
It kind of depends on the attrition that we experience every year. How many folks retire, how many choose jobs in another school district for some reason. It's not so much the teaching staff that I'm worried about. It is likely that we'll find some sort of certification for most of those folks. It might be harder for some of the specialists, but those have been hard to find, period. The folks where it's clear we'll have some, reductions likely is in administration and support staff like AAs, custodians, and food service. Those are the positions where they're staffed on a per building basis, more or less, and so we're not going to have another building. And so those will be the areas where it's obvious that there will be reductions, and because there's often fewer of them, it's not so obvious that there will be attrition in those areas. That said, it's been hard to hire food service folks lately, so I suspect we have a job for everyone there, and other positions as well. I'm hopeful.
So one thing that comes up quite a bit is class sizes. So whenever you talk about taking away a building, pushing students into other directions, it increases the student population. Will that increase class sizes?
It will not increase class sizes. Our target class size is exactly the same as it always has been, around 25 students at the middle school level. Depends on the class too. You have a few more in orchestra, you have a few less in a shop class where there's safety concerns. And so our targets for class sizes will be exactly as they have always been. There'll simply be more teachers in those buildings in order to teach the more students that are also in those buildings. That said, we become more efficient though. If we were dividing classes out, with 3 buildings and we had 22 students per class as a result in order to accommodate all the needs, when we're in 2 buildings, we might get closer to that target of 25 students and might be able to not have a need for another teacher as a result. And so by becoming more efficient, we get closer to our desired class sizes.
Are there that many empty classrooms at the Longfellow and Logan to accommodate for those extra classes?
There are no such thing as empty classrooms in schools. Teachers find uses for those spaces, they expand into them to provide an even better education for kids. But that said, there is definitely underutilization and different utilization than we have had over the years in all of our buildings. And in some cases, just empty classrooms. And so We've done a tour of the buildings, we've talked to staff, talked to administrators. We know that there are classrooms that we can use to accommodate this change.
What, oh, go ahead. You got it. You got it, you got it.
For additional context, I'm curious if you could speak to, given other districts our size and the number of buildings that we have, can you draw some comparisons between the two and what other districts are doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the surprising things to me when we went through our last referendum was seeing similar sized school districts and the number of buildings that were present in each. And at that time it was about the high school, and what we found is we are easily the smallest school district in the state with 2 high schools. That wasn't something, you know, we really thought we would find in that investigation, but it is the case. At the middle school level, you know, it is common to have 2 for a school district our size. As you get bigger, there's sometimes 3, but it is pretty rare. Sometimes they divide them out differently, like a 5-6 and a 7-8, but having 3 in a school district our size is uncommon, if not unheard of at this point, given our continued decline in enrollment. And at the elementary level, the more common average is around 7 elementary schools for a school district our size, but that has a wide range from 4 up to 11, depending on a 2,000 student spread.
So essentially, given a school district our size, we have more high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools when we compare across the state.
Absolutely, and we see other school districts addressing that as well. They're facing declining enrollment. Most city school districts are. There are some suburban school districts that have seen some increasing enrollment. We see that locally in Holman, but city school districts have seen declining enrollment consistently for years. I think the Wausau School Board is meeting tonight to consolidate to 1 high school. They're going to a junior high, senior high model in their 2 existing high schools, 10-12 and 8-9 or 7-9. It was the topic of our large district caucus when we meet at the state education convention. The large school districts get together to talk about issues that are common to them. Consolidation of buildings was top of mind for many, many school districts. Oshkosh is in the midst of a huge reorganization. Just on the north side, they went from, I think, 5 or 6 buildings down to 3. So this is a common topic across school districts, trying to become more efficient with the money that they have, invest in the buildings that they know they'll be investing in for a while. Very common.
I think just because it's common doesn't mean it's not going to hurt. Right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's where everything that has been discussed so far, I can agree with 100%. The fears of a referendum that fails again. The community conversations that have been ongoing about Lincoln and closing and what that neighborhood might look like. But for me personally, that turnaround time just feels unfair for kids and families. And we can accept that it's true that we need to consolidate and that we need to come down on these different decisions. But the time frame has been so tight, and we've been forced into this because of our failed fall referendum.
And I would say a lack of state funding.
Exactly,
we couldn't have
right.
anticipated
And so,
0 new state funding for education.
Right, and so in the context of all of this, we still have a little bit of room on this referendum to bump up so that the pain isn't felt so greatly by our students and families and staff. It's common, this declining enrollment is happening, consolidation is happening, but we can ease that transition.
So here's my question about that.
Yeah.
And I would just like you to speak to this. Because I don't hear you arguing that Lincoln shouldn't be closed, but that maybe it should happen a year from now because a 7-month transition period is not as favorable as a 1 year and 7-month transition. I just want to make sure I understand that first. So I assume based on the maintenance cost and whatnot, this is just not a single additional $1.5 million. I mean, there are additional costs, it would seem, on top of that, given what has been laid out in terms of the projected maintenance cost. So I just want to make sure we have a complete dollar picture in terms of,
Yeah,
and
I
that's
think-
assuming
yeah.
that nothing else happens in the coming year that's unforeseen, right? In terms of those maintenance costs?
The additional cost would be the operating cost, which is about $130,000 on average, you know. So that is something that we would still have to address. There are planned maintenance for the building as well. If we knew it was closing, we would do the minimal amount, right? And so if it's, I think it's somewhere around $400,000 of planned maintenance for next year, we would not do some of that, right, knowing that the building wouldn't be there. But, you know, things still happen, you know. At one of our elementary schools, you know, over the summer, a wall fell down. We had to put the wall back up. You know, those are necessary things. We have pipes leak and break, and we have to tear out sections of wall in order to replace those. We have roof leaks and other maintenance. And so there's some of that will show up that's unavoidable, you know, and you just kind of roll the dice and hope it doesn't happen. But some of it's planned, and we'll be able to avoid that, you know. And the routine maintenance is captured in that $130,000 a year. You know, so there's always plumbing and electrical and stuff, casework that needs to go on. You know, so there is some knock-on costs, you know, maybe it's $250,000, you know, somewhere in that range that, you know, isn't accounted for, you know, in that $1.5 million of savings. It'd be a little bit more.
This question is more difficult to answer because it is hypothetical and we don't know the future. But I'm curious if you have thoughts about if it were postponed for a year, what impact it would have on students enrolling, knowing that it wouldn't be there a year after. So in other words, would some students go ahead and opt into the other middle schools, and what impact could that possibly have?
Yeah, we have a intra-district transfer policy, and students, you know, very shortly here, families will be putting in applications to go to a different school. You know, if I was a 5th grade parent and I knew that my building was going to close, I would probably be curious about attending a different middle school to keep them with a group of friends and teachers consistently. You know, that is something that we've seen, you know, hints at this last year, as, you know, because we've been talking about this for 2 years, and so folks have asked, like, hey, if Lincoln's closing, can I go somewhere else? What we have historically done is we have a certain number of teachers assigned to our middle schools based on projected enrollments, and it's based on the students that live in that boundary area or are already scheduled to attend there. Once we look at the students that are already assigned there, we're looking at that 25 student to classroom ratio, and once we hit that limit, then we don't allow more students to inter-district transfer in. And so that would be the case for Lincoln as well. It would limit the number of students who were able to transfer in based on the number of teachers that were assigned there. And typically we don't reassign teachers because there's a bunch of students that want to transfer out, because we need to make each building viable. We need to be able to offer a comprehensive education to those students. We need to justify the positions of all those folks there. We need to disproportionately burden other middle schools, you know, without the necessary supports following them, you know. So it would I mean, for some folks, you know, it would be fine. They'll just stay there. And if you're going into 8th grade, it works out well. You know, you'll finish out your career and move on. You know, but for the incoming 6th graders and the 7th graders, there would be a quandary for some folks naturally. You know, and that would be whether it was made right now or, you know, a year from now.
So realistically, if you were to say, like, let's prolong this, majority of the 6th graders would probably go off to whatever boundary school they were going to go to, and the 8th graders would go off to whatever high school they're going to go to. So essentially, we would just have a building with 8th graders that...
Yeah, we would limit the 6th grade up to outs. Like, we wouldn't be able to accommodate intra-district transfer to other school buildings and still run that middle school with the staff necessary. And so we would put a cap on the number of transfers out so that we could still maintain a school there successfully. And so it would look relatively similar to what it does this year. There would be some folks that were unhappy, though, because they were trying to obviously plan for the future of their child, which I totally get.
So my question to you, we've talked about kind of like the teachers and the staffing. How does the district plan to support families through this transition?
Yeah, that would be the next big step if a decision were made. We've taken a first, dip into that with our first parent meeting to get a sense of what, their thoughts, hopes, concerns were. We would be extending that substantially out into the next couple of months to meet with families, provide opportunities, as much communication as possible, and especially as it relates to transportation, access to school, if they receive amenities or not amenities, if they receive supports or services at Lincoln, what does it look like in this new school, and just helping folks transition comprehensively from where we're at now to there. And whether that happens over 7 months or a year and 7 months, the process would be relatively the same. For a lot of folks, though, it won't become real until it's very close to that time, and so it'll be most important to be really intensive in the months right before that transition. Planning for something that happens 7 months from now is hard for a lot of folks. They just want to get through right now, and then probably this summer is when folks will really start to need support as they think about that next step.
Can you say a little bit about the staff and faculty that travel between the middle schools? That always feels like a terrible situation to be caught in as a teacher, where you're splitting a mental health professional. And I know that I have visited with people who've left the district because they felt like there wasn't enough support staff. Would this address that in some ways?
It would certainly get better. As you have more students in a building, you have more sections of classes. And so instead of being, at Longfellow for art for, 3 class periods and then going over to Lincoln for 3, all of those students would be there in one place. And so they'd be able to stay in one building, to have that consistency, to not be stuck, traveling through town for some period of time. Instead, they'd be accessible to students. And that applies to encore teachers and to our specialists like mental health professionals, school social workers. And one of the ways that it impacts students is, every student has a different person, their person in a building. Sometimes it's their classroom teacher, sometimes it's the art teacher, sometimes it's a social worker. And sometimes that person's there all day, and that is awesome. And if they're going through something, they have somebody that they can, when they're walking through the hallway, they can get a wave or a smile, or they can stop in and have a chat, and that makes all the difference for that kid's day. For some of our students with a high number of shared staff, that person isn't there all day when they need them, and that can tilt the tenor of their day. It can mean the difference between having a successful academic day or not, or having a mental health crisis. And so it's not a huge thing by any means, right? Because there's great people across our schools and everyone can help kids. But every kid identifies with somebody just a little bit differently. And as you have more full-time staff, that starts to make an impact on how students' day goes. And then the other thing, kind of similar to that I mentioned in this recommendation as well, is just the available staff when stuff happens. As our buildings get smaller, there's fewer support staff available. And if somebody's sick or gone for the day, instead of dividing that work between 2 or 3 people, it might just be on one person's shoulders. And it becomes even more challenging to accommodate student behaviors, mental health crises, safety issues, academic support, And so having a decent number of people in your building allows you to be more responsive to students, more flexible. The immediate impact is a better outcome for students, but it also leads to a greater sense of mental well-being for our staff. They don't feel like they're always shouldering the whole load. They can divide that between their colleagues and have a team to take care of things.
So some of my comments I won't say they're not going to sound contradictory, but I just want to challenge us to think about something. Because I'm grappling with it too, to be honest with you. But one thing that I think about with Lincoln is the summer. So knowing that particular building is in a high needs area, and you probably didn't think about this now, but knowing you probably did already. So, but just thinking about how meals and things are provided for families in the summer, or even in the academic year, Have we thought about or considered ways in which we can still provide that and support those families there? Would that then kind of be just going to like a Hamilton, or what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, as long as we have access to the building, we'd be able to continue to provide summer supports there. You know, distance is relative, and, you know, how far a student's willing to walk or what streets they have to cross, you know, impacts their ability to travel. But, you know, Hamilton isn't that far away, and it does provide a summer nutrition program that all students in that area have access to, you know, so that would be an ongoing opportunity. We're continually looking to revitalize our summer school programming and how that works, to expand partnerships with various groups, whether that's the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, and so providing summer school programming is an option too, you know, even at elementary schools nearby, and whether that's at Emerson or Hamilton, you know, whatever school would make kids feel comfortable coming to, it's an option to look into.
I would assume too, based on how that land might be repurposed, there could be potential opportunities or partnerships, depending on what the community decided.
Yeah, depending on how that building is repurposed, or the lot is repurposed, you know, if it's a bunch of single-family homes or, you know, higher density, you know, townhomes, you know, there won't be maybe that option. But if there's a community center there, or the city parks department gets involved and does something, you know, there might be opportunities there as we move forward. You know, if Lincoln does close and that lot is slated for redevelopment, you know, we would be working with the neighborhood associations, with the city, to figure out what the best use is. You know, we're not city planners. That we hire great people for that in our city, and our neighborhood associations know what their neighborhood needs most, and so we would be collaborating with them for what that next thing looks like. And part of it might be ongoing supports for students and families in that area in some way.
So this increase, I guess we probably can't decide on that tonight if we were to increase the referendum.
Increase? We have to, yep. So like tonight is the night for referendum stuff. The issue of the referendum and the building closure are tied inextricably because they both relate to finances and what our future holds. You know, if we're making decisions on the best possible timelines around staffing, you know, those things happen by mid-February at the latest, so that we can, you know, give folks an opportunity to sort through what the next steps look like for them. If it involved a building closure, we want to give families as much time as possible to know what the next steps look like. You know, so with referendum, tonight is the night. It has to happen tonight. And so there's, you know, follow-on decisions as it relates to Lincoln. You know, the decision around Lincoln can be delayed some, you know, but to be kind to all involved as soon as possible, one way or the other, is best.
So I wasn't saying, I know it has to be decided tonight, but I'm saying in terms of like being able to make a decision around whether or not we increase the referendum, I feel like there's some things that need to be, there's some unknowns in that.
But we have to decide tonight, because
For sure.
today is the day. So whether we want to increase it, decrease it, keep it the same, it has to be done tonight.
Okay.
That number has to be decided today.
For sure.
I think this is why I'm still just struggling with this so much, is because the timeline, again, like I feel like I'm repeating myself, it's so tight. And these are such big decisions, and they affect so many people. And even though Lincoln is the smallest middle school, the students from Lincoln will go to the two other ones. So it's not just Lincoln students and staff, this is every single middle school student and staff across the entire district. And like, time is of the essence and we have to vote on this. But I also feel like voting to delay a closure, or even if there was some like magic, delayed the decision for a little bit to allow the community to grieve the loss of the school. And I think this is part of the problem that we faced with the fall referendum, was that grief process. Even though building would have been years in advance, 7 months is a really short time to allow for grieving. and it would even be less than that because families only experience school during the school year. And I don't know, I just, like, I understand everything that's at stake, but I feel like a closure in the fall will be very painful.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. You know, there's families that have had a very challenging journey through COVID, and, you know, some have been online and then in person in this school and in that school. I totally understand that. You know, the reason I make this recommendation to the board is because I'm also thinking about the alternative path, the other cuts that would need to be made, the impacts that would be felt, you know, across the school district in terms of staffing and other things.
I'm kind of all about this because my kids went to Lincoln too, and it was a great school for them. I think while keeping Lincoln open for another year probably makes little to no financial sense. It does buy us time to bring the community along so they can see what what the numbers are and why we're looking at this decision. It also allows the neighborhood and the community to look at possibilities. Who knows if there isn't something that could be possible? It also allows more grieving, and I think it would be important for it to have some closure if we do go that route. So that's kind of what's going on in my mind right now. Like I said, I don't think it makes much sense financially, and I think we're going to get there. Maybe we won't. It'd be a blessing if we wouldn't. But I would be more up to go with a stronger referendum and hold back and look at maybe having a group look at some of the alternatives for that area and talk about the things that we've known for 2 years. But until you take it out there, the community doesn't necessarily hear it.
I have a question. If the board voted to close it, can the board have a closure date, not of this fall, but the next fall, so it doesn't kick it down the road another year, as has so often happened when it comes to long-range facility planning?
Yep, absolutely. The board could establish a date for closure. I mean, that's essentially what would happen, whether it was 7 months or a year from 7 months from now. And that would initiate, depending on the timeline, the activities that we would take, some more urgently than others, depending on if it was 7 months or a year and 7 months.
That feels like a better compromise, because I'm with Shondell. I'm like, it's been in discussion every year since I've been here. It's going to happen, and teachers must be wondering every year if this is the year, this is the year, this is the year, and parents too, and students. And so having a date set, even if we pushed it so that the community could think about, and the parents could think about adjusting, might be a good compromise.
I would just offer up that, you know, depending on what the board chooses to do for a referendum, there are, you know, significant financial challenges still, and so, you know, those will have to be addressed. And, you know, depending on what the state comes through with, you know, I just put that out there that, you know, it is all about choices ultimately, right? Like in any of our programs, we can have low class sizes or we can not. We can have, you know, low special education to student ratios or not. You know, those are all choices that we're trying to just make to provide the best possible education for all of our students, and this is another one.
I don't know how I feel. I guess my question to the board would be, in this particular situation, would it be best to have us walk alongside families and support families as we know that this is closing? What would be the real rationale? I mean, I hear some of the points of like, well, let's just hold it off for another year. But if we know that this is happening, I feel like if the district walk alongside families and make sure that we do this in the right way, would be a little bit better than playing like, let's just hold off. We know it's gonna hurt, but like, let's hold off. Because I don't know, that's just probably my opinion, because
No, I
I've
share
seen the
those concerns.
conversation happening continuously, and it's just, I just couldn't imagine being a parent or a staff member and having to have this conversation multiple times.
My kids went to Lincoln as well. These are difficult decisions, and we have for months tried to educate where we could around the situation that we are in this district. These are hard. This is what we're elected to do, is to consider them and try to make the best decisions and be, at the same time, balance being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We're doing right by our students and staff as well, which makes it all the more difficult. I share your concern about what would an additional year do or accomplish, and what would be the consequences felt across the whole district by doing that. That's what I'm thinking of.
Right, you think about the staff that know that the school is going to close, so they leave mid-year because they find other opportunities. So I'm not sure. Yes, absolutely, this is painful. It's painful for everyone, but it needs to happen. And if we wait, it's a $1.5 million, is that right?
I think the struggle for me, first of all, I'm an external processor, so like the fact that we got the most information we've ever received on this tonight at the meeting has been a challenge for me, big time, because I can't chat it out with anybody, so I'm sitting here like trying to process it all, and it's challenging. It's very challenging. Although I've heard the rumors too that Lincoln's likely closing this year or next year. I've heard that for a while, but it was the last meeting and a workshop where we had some information, and tonight by far we received the most information. So that's frustrating to me. I also wonder what we would gain by deferring a year. I think, I don't know, I just feel very, like, to me, if we agreed to increase the amount we are asking for in the referendum to cover the cost of Lincoln for one more year. If we were going to increase the referendum at all, I would rather see that money go to staff increases. I joined, just for context, I joined district staff and Brad in Milwaukee last week for a school district conference. And one of the sessions I went to was about how to get a successful referendum. And what I learned in that session was that the biggest predictor of successful referenda are the community's trust in the district and the district's reputation. And I worry about where we stand on that right now. And so I'm just really like conflicted in my mind, because I feel like what the district's recommendation right now for referendum, I think, is conservative. I would like to see us go for more. I worry that our reputation in the community right now, especially if we close Lincoln this year, isn't strong enough to approve more. Those are my thoughts. I don't know.
No, I think that's valid. I would say when we talk about trust, it's important to talk about whose trust are we referring to, right? Because now if we move this into an equity conversation, people of color have had lack of trust in systems and districts for a really long time, and no one's cared. And so now we move this to, let's be honest, this is a predominantly white community, predominantly white district. And now there's folks, and this is not to you, obviously, Katie, because community members have said this too, this thing around trust. And I think that that's really important for us to really examine when we talk about trust. Whose trust are we referring to? Is it like everybody in the community? Because if it is, then when we were trying to address equity and the lack of trust in communities of color with districts and government entities and so on and so forth, nobody was around for that. So I just find that fascinating that we throw that out there quite a bit. It's my opinion. But I do see your point in making sure that we have a valid, trusting community to be able to make sure we're making good decisions around referendums and things like that. So I don't want to devalue anything that you said. I completely understand and agree.
I think this is why personally, I'm still just struggling with all of the decisions. Because it's such a tight turnaround. We're still trying to rebuild trust. The decisions change the way we do school. And also, frustrated that we have this detailed report before us that, me, like a super nerd who loves to study, I would have loved to have come with a prepared statement and all the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. But because we've had such little time, and these reports are great, thank you for putting them together.
Sooner's better.
It's just, and this is why the delay of the year felt like, to me, a compromise. I can understand that a year feels like nothing. For a sixth grader who's moving into seventh grade, if they transition to middle school right before seventh grade or eighth grade, it's gonna suck both ways. And I can tell you that as a personal moving story of moving before seventh grade. It sucks. But yeah, my fears of going low and being conservative, whether we close Lincoln in a year or now, the fear of the what ifs if we go too high that you have, Dr. Cooper stole, are the same fears that I have, if we close Lincoln and we go too low and we miss that opportunity to bring people in. But
I've been listening quite a bit. I haven't really said much. I have two stepchildren who attended Lincoln. I student taught at Lincoln, so Lincoln is a near and dear piece of my history. The last referendum, there was a number of conversations that I heard. We support public education, we just don't support this plan. We also heard predominantly that a different idea was to close all three middle schools and move those students into the high schools. So that is something to consider about listening to the community and hearing their perspective. I also think that we are in different times. Hearing that this community supports public education, I would say historically is correct. This community has supported operational referenda in its history. But we are also in an era of inflation that we haven't seen since the 1970s, where schools were funded differently. So I'm not sure if people can actually take the financial burden of a higher referenda, even though I would love to see a higher referenda, because I believe our employees deserve to be appropriately compensated. I would also say that we were given the feedback from the staff about a 4.7% salary increase this past summer. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear concerns about getting an 8% salary increase in this upcoming year. Nobody that I know of is getting that amount, but I firmly believe that that's exactly what our employees should be getting. The challenges are real, the challenges are different, and we can't find qualified staff or employees. The times where we could get 100 to 200 or even 300 applicants for an elementary school position are gone. We'd be lucky if we even get 10 per position, or a handful. So retaining our qualified staff at all levels is of paramount importance to me, to ensure that we have high-quality education. But I also say it is challenging. I see the challenge, I feel the challenge of needing to make this decision tonight. But I do not feel that we can wait longer. I also feel that we will also get feedback from families if we were to delay and we put a cap in on how many people can move out of the building. I'm sure we will hear concerns from those families saying, well, I'm trying to plan for my child, and now I'm not allowed to do what I think is appropriate and valuable for my child's education moving forward. There are all sorts of complexities to this decision. But I think that we as a board have to decide tonight, and we have to make a decision tonight of how we proceed, and we have to take the entire district into consideration, all of our students, no matter if they're in middle school or not, because everybody's going to get affected. And if we want to retain the school district that we have, if we want to retain the high quality that we have, then the decision has to come tonight.
We still have 56 minutes.
Need a vote to continue on until midnight. We have to be done by midnight.
Okay.
Sorry,
Nice.
folks.
So to raise staff salary by 1% is $680,000, is that?
It's about that.
Okay. So the current recommendation for referendum assumes a 3% increase annually, correct?
Yes.
So if we increase that to 4%, for example, just to play with some numbers, times the 6 years of the proposed referendum, that would be just over $4 million. And then each $1 million increase to what you proposed, you said is another 17 cents on the mill. Okay. So that would be for a $200,000 household, $136 a year, added to the $34 a year the current recommendation is. So if we, you following me? Okay. So if we're thinking about increasing for the sake of staff wages, for example, from 3 to 4%, that would be asking taxpayers living in an average size house in the district of $200,000 to pay $170 a year.
Maybe less than that. So if it was an additional 680,000 a year, it'd be less than so it's about 2/3 of a million, so it'd be about 2/3 of 17 cents, so it'd come in somewhere around 10 cents additional. So the extra million ends up coming out, or 680, comes out to about 27 cents. So the average person would pay $54 a year.
Total?
And difference from this year.
Okay,
to
so
next.
add that to 34 cents. So 54 plus 34?
Just 54.
Just 54.
Just 54? Okay.
And again, I think this is, again, not only Ms. Sprang's presentation, but these conversations show the financial picture that we're in and what it will take to get us to where our ideal would be. And we're not even aiming for ideal. We're aiming to maintain.
So I'm like investigating Ms. Bauman's thoughts, right? So if it delayed a year, we need to come up with $1.5 million to avoid dramatic cuts to our school district. You know, if it was $1 million added on to the referendum, and we found $500,000 in cuts elsewhere, you know, you'd be talking $6.5 million the first year, so it'd be a 34-cent increase in the mill rate, $11 million the second year. You know, that would continue on for the total of the 6 years. So that would delay closing a year. We'd have to become frugal in some respects in order to become more efficient. You know, if you go all the way up to $7 million, now you're talking 42 cents mill rate difference.
By frugal, you don't mean like staff layoffs? Because that's like the secret, like thing beneath all of the discussions about money increases and finding savings is, with 80% of our budget is staff. None of us would ever want to entertain a scenario where frugal would also mean staff layoffs.
$500,000 probably wouldn't involve layoffs. We would find reductions through attrition, you know, or make changes to how we, you know, operate our buildings or staff them. You know, we might use more proportional staffing as opposed to per building staffing, or, you know, there's a range of different strategies to investigate with that.
I think that would make it harder for buildings to address their behavioral challenges, and there's sub shortages as well. And the linkages that I've attended, those are the number 1 and 2 things that come up.
Our hope would be to avoid things that directly impact students, direct instruction, but all of this wouldn't have there's always an impact on students, whether it's, having enough AA support in a building in order to respond to parents immediately and to address kids' needs. There's building custodians available to clean up after students and create a building atmosphere that's safe and secure. There's impacts one way or the other. Like, there's no getting around that. And that's not a problem of our causing. It's historic underinvestment in public education, and we've just got to manage as best we can. And so I think the referendum, it's about identifying, what is an appropriate amount to fund our schools at a level our parents and staff expect, but is also responsive to the financial capacity of our community. And so that's, largely your sense of the folks you talk to and the people you interact with. And, I recommended something that was on the more conservative end. I think it's important for us to get a win, so to speak, to move forward. But I also understand that $1.5 million in budget cuts or closing Lincoln could also impact that as well. And so, your sense of that balance of, is it worth adding a little bit more to delay something a year? It could be valuable and help give those students and families the transition they need. We just have to address the other consequences of it.
If I'm being honest with what the community has said, as I've talked with them in all of the awful weeks since that referendum failed, people just want to save their schools, every single one of them, which is a financial impossibility, acknowledging everything that Dr. Jimenez said. And so I think through that whole consolidation process that is coming, smoothing it and easing it for people so that it doesn't become something that causes greater distrust or alienation from, the district. And I think there's soft things that you can't quantify when you gain a year. Students will have a chance to figure out who's moving to their school and who's not. They'll figure out teachers that may be moving to their school or not. There could be opportunities for dropping in at the middle school or something like that and seeing what the culture is like. Yeah.
No, you're not wrong.
Point of information. Are we still in the information section?
Yes.
Okay. So then, are we able, Robert's rule, I don't know.
Yeah.
Are we able to do a soft poll of where's the board sitting with this, or is it
Yeah, you can do anything at this point. You can ask kind of where everybody's at this point. Obviously, that decision doesn't mean that it will actually be the final vote.
Right, for sure.
So it is kind of a straw poll. Yes, you can definitely do that.
Is everyone comfortable with doing that right now, or you want to wait?
Are you asking in terms of is...
Right, that's also a good point.
I would say that the first decision is probably around Lincoln. It will inform your decisions around referendum amount.
Okay.
I think my bigger question first would be where we're at in terms of a board on a vote tonight on that.
Oh, good question.
There's the option to table it and pick it up in 2 weeks, to have time to read through the information, to talk to folks in the community. Like I said, a decision should be made by mid-February, and every week that we delay, if it ends up being closed, that is less time for folks to react and change. It also impacts how you think about the referendum potentially, because then that is cast in stone. But to Dr. Cooperstill's point, it doesn't have to be tonight.
I'm just curious, based on the conversation conversation tonight and some of the emails we've received and the public comments, like, do you feel confident that your initial recommendations are still where you feel the best moves are?
It's what I think is best for the school district, absolutely.
Okay.
But I also am completely open to, the comments that folks have made, the things that people have said, but I wouldn't have recommended it, even without knowing all of those things would likely come, so.
If I could clarify, your recommendation you're okay with, but as a minimum, in terms of the referendum, correct? If it were higher.
Ms. Burkett was talking about Lincoln more, right? Or both?
Yeah.
The referendum, a minimum. I think there's certainly capacity to go higher and mitigate other things. But that recommendation was born out of kind of like minimum needs to continue to operate our school district as it currently stands, with knowing that challenging right sizing of our facilities will still need to occur.
I don't think we could delay the vote on Lincoln unless we voted on a higher referendum amount.
Yeah, and that's why on the agenda we have the consider middle school consolidation first, so that if we decide to not close Lincoln, then the next piece of the agenda is to consider the approval of the non-recurring operational referendum, and we would have to decide what value we would put to that.
Right, but there was also the talk of postponing the vote on Lincoln until February, maybe.
Right, and if that were to happen, we would still have to decide what the value is, whether we stay with the 55.5, whether we increase it, and then we would have to go with our next board meeting to determine what we do with consolidation. And if we decide to consolidate it and we asked for more, that's a consideration. If we decide to not close it and we didn't increase it, that's another consideration, just as much as the other ones of we decided to close it and we kept it the same or increased it, et cetera, right? I mean, there's all those different variables to consider. You would all have to take that into consideration when you make your decision.
And I would say that my recommendation as far as the referendum goes is not keeping all of the ESSER supports that we have currently. It's still retracting those back to a level that is less than we currently have. It doesn't account for the loss of our Project Aware grant in the near future, but it does allow us to continue operating our schools at a level that was greater than before the pandemic, so it is good for kids. That said, there is room, certainly, to increase our ability to attract and retain the fantastic staff we have, to continue the crucial mental health supports that Project Aware has provided for us. It's just a matter of the political calculus that folks have about what's viable in our community at a referendum. And so that's what, all of that calculus for me, that's what bore out that recommendation. If the board and you talk to lots of folks and have different conversations, you think that there's more capacity there, I am totally on board to support that. And whether that involves delaying Lincoln for a year or not, that is certainly viable as well. There's just follow-on ramifications for us to manage in the school district.
Well, I know since we're in the information portion, we have a little more flexibility, but I think that someone needs to I'd like to see someone make a motion if they want to table it, so we can actually see whether that motion is supported. And if not, then we will move on to the action portion.
So first, you just want to see a straw poll, is that correct? Or do you want to go into the action to actually consider?
If there's one or more board members who want to table it, then that should come up, and we should decide whether or not we're actually going to table it or go to a vote.
You mean table it for another meeting?
Yeah,
Just
the
the Lincoln part.
There's no option with the Lincoln part to change the closure date from fall 23 to future time? Like if there was, so like, and I think like tabling the discussion is like one option, right? But another could be, instead of closing in 7 months, it's a year and 7 months, right?
You have complete flexibility.
Right, you still have that ability to do that. It depends on how the motion is brought forward and whether it passes or not.
So the first question you might ask yourself is, do we want to make a decision today or do we want to wait 2 weeks? The second decision might be, do we want to set a date on it for 7 months from now or a year and 7 months from now? Or do we just not want to talk about it at all again and push it off for some other board to consider? I mean, those are all options, not within what I would recommend, but.
Well, I mean, if we're going to vote on closing Lincoln by the fall, I mean, I will be voting no. I don't think it needs to be tabled, but I think that giving an extension is like a reasonable compromise on the timeline for closure. So I'm not going to like make a motion to table it because I think that's wrong too.
How about trying to come back at the next meeting with a motion that we set some time frames that we will decide by, this is kind of kicking the can down. But we will set a timetable of possible closing of it by, say, by August, so we can get, possibly have a community and neighborhood input to decide any alternatives if there are, or to bring them along to understand some of the stuff that we're going through in discussion of potential closure. I think we need to stop kicking it down. I get that.
From a clarification standpoint to what you said, Mr. Corbett, when you talk about, there was a word you said, goodness, I was listening, trust me. Trust me, I'm sleepy. Alternatives. When you say alternatives, what do you mean? Like alternatives to closing Lincoln or alternatives to like?
So the neighborhood could talk about what alternatives are for the building.
Oh, for the building, okay.
I presume they'll have those meetings anyway, though, right? Like,
We wouldn't have a bunch of meetings and ask people to make suggestions about what to do with the building if we never intended to close it, right? There's some way in which making this decision that the building will be closed is what kicks off all those meetings with the community for them to have input on what the building would be used for instead.
Well, it will be up to the developer ultimately, what happens to that building happens.
Yeah. I felt like that was a lot with a lot of the vitriol from the prior referendum too, was the idea that we weren't having meetings about doing something with spaces that we couldn't have meetings about doing with them until we decided as a board we were going to put the referendum on the, so some of these decisions are linked. This decision has to happen before that one.
Again, it's not up to the school board to decide what happens.
Right.
That would be outside entities from the school board. It's getting quiet. So my assumption is we've talked quite a bit. It is military time. It's 8:22. So are we comfortable moving forward to matters reserved for board action? The first one would be consider middle school consolidation, and I'd like to first, before we make that determination as a consensus, when we make motions, they are always made in the affirmative. So in other words, the motion would be to either table the conversation or it would be to close. And then that would have to be voted up or down. That's how Robert's Rules works. You cannot have a negative motion. All right, so the motion has to be in the affirmative. Okay, so that would be the motion. We'd need a second, and then we would vote that motion up or down. Same thing with tabling. Motion second, and then we could have another conversation if we want, but then we would vote that up or down. So I just want to make that clear, because there may be people in the audience who might consider us making an affirmative motion as a done decision, and that's not correct. That is how Robert's Rules works.
Gotcha.
Okay. So how are we feeling comfortable moving forward to matters reserved for board action? Is there any objection to moving forward? Okay. I am not hearing anything, so then go ahead, please.
I'm concerned about the referendum price, or the take of the referendum. If like for instance, if we close Lincoln right away, I'm thinking that it could have greater ramifications on the referendum than if we let things simmer and let people talk about it.
And so what would you recommend, Mr. Corbett?
hate tabling it, but I'd like to table it.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to table it.
Okay.
Closing.
So the motion on the floor currently, under 7.01, consider middle school consolidation, would be to table the decision until
Next.
our next board meeting, which would be the first meeting in February. Is there a second to tabling?
Can I ask a question? I'm so sorry to ruin the process.
That's all right, point of order, so go ahead. That's how it works.
So tired. Worked all weekend. How does that affect what we're asking for with the referendum if we table it, though? Does that mean that we have to automatically go up just in the off chance that, like, suddenly in February, everybody's like, we have to keep Lincoln?
That's why.
Like, if that's what we're hearing from people?
Yeah, that's what I tried to describe earlier, that we have a lot of challenges ahead of us in terms of determining what's the best value to put on the referendum if we table the decision, because there could be situations that we decide to table it, we increase the referendum just in case, and then we decide to close it anyway. And then what does that mean? Are we okay with that? I mean, I think that that's what we have to decide as board members. Are we going to be okay with that? Is the community going to be okay with that? If we decide to not increase the referendum and then we do decide to not close Lincoln, are we okay with making that determination and decision? Is the community going to be okay with that? So I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm not saying that we can't do it, but I am saying that it just adds more questions for you all to consider in this short time frame.
I think the reality, though, and I just want like folks that are listening and hearing this to really understand that no matter if Lincoln closes and we keep the referendum at this minimum baseline, it's still not enough. So, because I know that we're not trying to, but in some ways, like when we start doing this thing of like, well, if we leave Lincoln open and we raise the referendum, then folks will vote for it, or if we, whatever the case may be, it isn't enough. And so I think that we have to be transparent and honest about that.
So I need to jump in for a second since we continued the conversation and there was no second. The motion
Sorry.
dies for a moment. No, you're fine. The motion dies for lack of a second, but that doesn't mean you can't bring it up again. And we can see if there would be a second. So I just want to make sure that we dispense with the motion that we had on the floor, if there's more conversation to have.
I mean, this is what I struggled with for months last year. We, again, have tried to communicate in as many ways as possible, like this is a dire situation, and it's not unique to our district. Districts across the state and across the U.S. are facing some of these very same challenges right now. And we have tried to be as open as possible about consolidation needs to happen. What do we want that to look like? The voters decided in the fall what they didn't want that to look like. And we were also very transparent about where we would be based on whether it passed or whether it failed. And then here we are. That's unfortunately not new, and it's not enough. And there will be future consolidation that will be needed.
So it's going to hurt my heart to do this. But I'd like to make a motion to approve the closing of Lincoln Middle School.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Spivey, seconded by Ms. Berkedal, to approve the closure of Lincoln Middle School. Is there any final discussion before we move to a vote?
Just ask if there's a date associated with that.
Great question. So is there a date that we want to do that? Is it, I'm assuming it would be the academic year 2023-24 or academic year 24-25?
Is your intent, Mr. Spivey, at the end of the current school year?
Could that be like a separate conversation? It has to be a part of this.
It has to be part of it.
Oh.
Yeah, if you're going to make the motion,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to make the motion, it's closure by date certain,
All right, end of the school year.
end of the school year. So, okay.
Or would that be the fall of, I don't know.
Yeah, could you do fall, because then for the summer
Summer,
we could still
yeah.
use.
So the fall of 23, question?
Mhm.
What'd you say?
Say that, Ms. Berkedal?
what would the financial impact of that be? Negligible, because there really isn't much staff in the building over the summer anyway.
It would allow the school district to continue operating in the building through the summer. So, I mean, if you picked, August 31st, 2023, that would, or is there 31 days in August? It would get us through that, any use that was necessary over the summer. It would initiate any next steps starting September 1st.
Right, but it wouldn't cost us significantly more extending that
No.
date by 3 months. Okay.
So,
So the date is August 31st, correct?
is that,
what we're saying?
yeah,
If that's your intent.
yeah. And so if that's the case.
All right, let me redo this.
Okay, well, hold on a second, because we technically have a motion and a second. So that one is on the table, so you can't rescind it because it's already been seconded. So, in terms of quasi-Robert's rules, friendly amendment, you're trying to add onto your motion a closure date of August 31, 2023. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. So, Ms. Berkedahl, would you be okay with adding that onto the motion that you already seconded or not?
Yes.
Okay. So then, without objection, the motion on the table is the closure of Lincoln Middle School as of end of day August 31, 2023. Is there any objection to the addition of that date into the motion? Hearing none, then that is the motion on the floor. So any other conversations that we need to have about the closure of Lincoln Middle School?
I mean, I feel like we've brought everything up. People have aired their grievances and ideas, right? I mean, nothing has changed in that short time period, so.
Yes. Well, again, by Robert's rules, we should have a conversation. The discussion happens after the motion, so I just want to verify everybody feels comfortable that they've said what they need to say before we move to a vote. And the question for Ms. Steigerwald, is there a need for a roll call vote or not on a motion like this?
I'm sorry.
Roll call vote, is that necessary or not? Okay. So then, no roll call vote is necessary. If a board member would like to have a roll call vote, they could make that motion to do that. Otherwise, it will just be ayes and nays. Is there anybody who would like to have a roll call vote on this?
Well, are we in discussion right now?
I'm asking as how to proceed
Okay.
in terms of, do we want an up or down vote, or do we want a roll call vote?
I mean, I think it makes sense to do a roll call.
I agree.
Just to know where people stand.
Roll call.
Okay, I don't disagree, but I didn't want to just make that decision on my own. I wanted the board members to have that conversation, so, how do I do this? Okay, so,
Do you want a motion to?
yeah, I think
I'll make a motion
for a
to
roll
have a
call
roll
vote.
call vote.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so the motion on the table right now is to move to a roll call vote. No discussion at all? Hearing none, I'm going to make it quick. All those in favor of having a roll call vote for the closure of Lincoln Middle School, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion has carried. We will have a roll call vote for the closure of Lincoln Middle School. Ms. Steigerwald, would you please call the roll?
Do you want to repeat the motion one more time?
Yes, the motion is to close the closure of Lincoln Middle School effective August 31, 2023. I have to remember it's 23, not 22 anymore. So August 31, 2023. Ms. Steigerwald?
So, Ms. Baumann?
No.
Ms. Berkedahl?
Yes.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Yes.
Dr. Garcia?
Yes.
Ms. Leahy?
Yes.
Mr. Korberg?
Nay.
Mr. Spivey?
Yes.
Dr. Jimenez?
Yes. So a motion of 6-2, am I correct here?
Yep.
Yep, so motion 6-2, the ayes have it, and we will be closing Lincoln Middle School effective August 31, 2022. We will move on to 7.02, to consider approval of the non-recurring operational referendum in the amount of, and so right now that number is open. The recommendation from the administration is 55.5 million. But the motion is up, so whoever would like to make a motion, you could choose that number if we want to, after a motion and second has passed, if we want to change that number, it would require an amendment. Anybody would like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve $60 million referendum.
Is there a second to approve a $60 million referendum?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Ms. Berkedahl, seconded by Ms. Baumann, to consider approval of a non-recurring operational referendum in an amount of $60 million. Is there any discussion on that motion?
Can someone calculate the mill rate?
Yeah, I was gonna say, remind me of what that is.
So that would be 6 million for the first year?
Yep.
And then 10.5 million for the 5 years thereafter. And so the approximate mill rate impact would be 25 cents.
It would be more than, because that was 6 million the first year. Oh, wait. Don't ask me to do math. I'll just trust you to do that. What?
So-
Sorry. What was the mill rate increase?
So it would be adding $500,000 on to the recommendation that I made, correct?
Per year.
Per year.
Yes.
So that would be an approximate 25-cent mill rate impact.
So it'd move from 17 cents to 25 cents.
So $25 per $100,000 household per year.
Correct.
So that, okay, $50 per $200,000.
Correct.
Still feels low.
So then I want to verify, because I'm hearing, and maybe it's just me, so I'm going to ask, I heard a $60 million referendum. Would that actually be the value of the referendum? Because it's that would not be $500,000 each year. That would just be $500,000 total.
$500,000 each year would be $58.5 million. So if it was 60, it would be another 2.5, so it would be some number less than $500,000 per year.
Okay. This is why I want to check that information, because I want to make sure we have the right motion and that we have the right mill rate, because we will be tied to those values, and I do not want to get this wrong.
So it'd be $750,000 additional per year would be a $60 million total. And so the mill rate impact of that
While we're figuring that out, point of clarification. I thought, or let me ask it this way. Isn't it possible in the April referendum to have 2 questions on the ballot? Not just one, correct?
It is possible to have 2 referenda in a calendar year, if I remember correctly. So you could either have 2 in April, you could have 1 in April, 1 in November, if there's a November election, but you can't have more than 2.
Gotcha.
Right, so you could also have 2 in November as well. So the maximum we are allowed is 2 referenda questions per calendar year.
And I guess we're going to do in November again.
mill rate impact would be approximately 29 cents.
So a $60 million referendum would be a $750,000 per year increase.
Of what we currently have.
Over what I recommended.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that would potentially allow for a 4% increase annually for staff.
Yes.
And that would be 29 cents per
Correct.
$100,000 household?
Mhm.
I'm keeping that motion.
Okay, so, thank you, Ms. Bergendahl, Ms. Baumann for the motion, Dr. Engel for making sure that we have the right numbers.
I'd like to hear from Ms. Spring.
Yes.
You're saying 60 million, but how do you want that broken down in the first year and then each of the consecutive 5 years? That's what we really need to do
Yeah,
first.
and the reason is
break
because
down
that's how it's
what
gonna
you did
show.
in the first year, and then in the following years, and that would give you the total of the referendums.
I believe it would be 6.25 million in the first year and 10.75 million in subsequent years.
Just whatever
Making a motion.
the proportionate split up is.
Yeah, and I understand why Ms. Brang is asking that, is because that's the way the motion, or excuse me, the referendum question will be worded. So we want to make sure that we have those values accurately written down, so that when we move the referendum resolution, that we have the right numbers that will be showing up on the ballot that people will receive when they go to the booth in April.
Are we in discussion now?
Yes, we are in discussion.
I am wondering, like, I agree with that. And also, I'm wondering if we can have 2 referendum questions in 1 calendar year, would it make sense to ask both? Right, you ask for that higher amount, and then you ask for that minimum amount, and let the voters decide, I guess, that piece.
Is it possible? I would
I
say
mean,
it
is
is possible. I would also say, then you will have to, as a board, be okay with either value being passed, or neither.
That's fair.
We have to pass this, what we have, or it's catastrophic
Correct.
for our district. So it's a gamble to raise it.
It's a gamble anyway.
It
Right,
is,
no matter what.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's imperative that this referendum gets the support of the staff of our district. And I think going for an assumed 3% increase isn't enough to get them at 4% is not enough, but it's better than 3%. I think going higher is the bigger, I don't know. That's just where my mind is at. I could be wrong. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball either.
Well, and just remember that we can vote this down. If we vote it down, then we would need another motion with a different value. So this is up to the board.
So there's also another way of doing this as well, based off our last workshop meeting, because we said there was, and I'm gonna get this wrong because I don't have it in front of me, but there's 2 different types of operational referendums, correct?
There's recurring and non-recurring.
Okay. And actually, never mind, that just would have made it way more complicated.
Okay.
I'm gonna stick with I guess what I'm wondering is how would other folks feel about having 2 questions? One with the minimum amount that Dr. Engel has suggested, and with the higher amount that Ms. Birkenau has suggested.
I'd like to know what Dr. Engel thinks about that.
Yeah,
Based on history of how referenda usually go. Yeah.
The challenge with that approach would be that if both passed, we would have both of them. And so we're not allowed in Wisconsin to do either ors or to do follow-ons like Minnesota has. And so it would be nice to provide more choice, at the polls for folks. Unfortunately, it's just not an option in Wisconsin the way our referendum laws are structured. And so it's really, if oftentimes, like when people build a new school building, they might also have a recurring referendum to pay for the operations of that building. And so they'll put 2 issues on the ballot, one to build the thing and one to fund it. And that's how those often run. Sometimes they'll have 2 issues. One of them is maybe for general operations, and one thing might be for something more specific. Might be mental health supports or technology or security upgrades. We're not really in one of those situations. All of ours are for, operations and maintenance, generally speaking, to do the things that we're interested in. And so, it doesn't make a ton of sense from my perspective to have 2 issues, right now. Maybe down the road it would, though.
And so was the mill rate an increase of 25 cents? Is that what I heard?
29 cents.
29 cents.
29
And so
cents.
how much does that come out to for average, like for a $200,000 home
$200,000 home would be $58
per year?
Per year.
But also, we did ask voters to support a lot more of our But it would have been a lot of other things, and it's hard to compare.
Yes.
I'm curious, so you mentioned that this does not, what you propose does not fund the Project Aware programs. Can you remind us again what those specifically are in the schools?
It's a wide range of supports from social emotional learning curriculum in classrooms to counseling support through the Student Family Assistance Program. Those are the two of the bigger items. Ongoing staff and student wellness programs, a lot of it, prospective and new and trying out stuff. And the things that we saw, the thing that really rose to the top in part was the Student Family Assistance Program and our partnership with Gunderson. That would be the primary thing we'd be looking to continue on into the future. Those folks did amazing work, and it would be nice to continue on lots of what they do. But so that there's elements of all of that, and there may be other funding streams as well. Grant opportunities, but those are fickle, and you don't know if they'll get them from year to year. Partnerships with insurance companies, for preventative services. But we're going to continue to seek ways to continue the most essential parts.
And that ends, the funding for that is finished what year?
I think after next year.
Other conversations on this motion? Hearing none. So then, the motion on the table is to consider the approval of the non-recurring operational referendum in the amount of $60 million, which, Dr. Engel, if you could remind us what the breakdown is.
For $6.25 million in the first year and $10.75 million in years 2 through 6.
Would the board like a roll call vote on this as well? Or just the yeas and nays? Do we require a roll call vote, Ms. Sagal? I didn't think so, so I just wanted to ask the board their pleasure. I'm not hearing any pleasure. So I think we'll just go ahead with up and down vote. So all those in favor of considering the approval of the non-recurring operational referendum in the amount of $60 million, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That motion has carried, and so we'll move on to 7.03, the resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed the revenue limit for 6 years for non-recurring purposes. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to adopt the resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for 6 years for non-recurring purposes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Dr. Cooper-Stoll, seconded by Mr. Spivey to adopt the resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for 6 years for non-recurring purposes. Dr. Engel, is there anything, or Ms. Sprang, that we need to discuss regarding the language that we would see in the authorization?
Just a clarification that it's $6.25 million for the first year and $10.75 million for years 2 through 6.
Okay. All right, any discussion? I'm hearing none. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
I do need a roll call vote.
Oh, thank you. That's right. These you do. I forgot. Thank you, Ms. Steigerwald. Could you give us a roll call vote on this, please?
Ms. Baumann?
Yes.
Ms. Berkedal?
Yes.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Yes.
Dr. Garcia?
Yes.
Ms. Leahy?
Yes.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye. Ayes have it. We'll move to 7.04, the resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed the revenue limit for 6 years for non-recurring purposes. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to adopt the resolution providing for referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for 6 years for non-recurring purposes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. So moved by Dr. Cooper-Stoll, and I will take Dr. Garcia as the second to adopt the resolution providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of a resolution authorizing the school district budget to exceed revenue limit for 6 years for non-recurring purposes. I'm assuming there's no discussion. Hearing none, then a roll call vote is needed for this.
Ms. Baumann? Yes.
Ms. Berkedal?
Yes.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Aye.
Dr. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg? Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Dr. Jimenez?
Aye. The ayes have it, and the resolution is passed, and we'll move on to 7.05, the open enrollment vacancies. Is there a motion?
I did not understand this report, sorry.
Okay, well, if we can have a motion first and a second, then we can answer that question.
I make a motion to approve the 2023-2024 unlimited regular and special education open enrollment seats with the exception of speech and language services, deaf and hard of hearing services, and American Sign Language educational interpreting services.
So moved by Dr. Cooper-Stoll. Is there a second? Second. Second by Mr. Korberg to approve the 2023-2024 unlimited regular and special education open enrollment seats with the exception of speech and language services, deaf and hard of hearing services, and American Sign Language educational interpreting services. Dr. Engel.
Yeah, so this report indicates how many students we would, or any limits we would put on students open enrolling into our school district. Generally speaking, we're interested in students open enrolling in. We provide a fantastic education to our kids and think others should choose it as well, even if they don't live here. However, there are some services for which it is incredibly hard to find staffing, and we have an obligation to serve the students that live within our school district boundaries before we serve students that live outside of it. And for the 3 areas where we're concerned that we would not have staffing to serve all students, and we want to ensure that we're serving our students who live in our boundaries first, those include speech and language services, deaf and hard of hearing services, and American Sign Language educational interpreting services. And so if a student was seeking to open enroll into our school district and they had a speech and language, they were identified with a disability in speech and language, we would deny their open enrollment because we could not properly serve them.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion has carried. We'll move down to announcements. Ms. Baumann.
Yeah, I'll just briefly mention, today the Grants Award Luncheon was held for the LPEF, and Scott Mihalovic was honored with the Margaret Dillman-Malzer Distinguished Service Award, and our own Dr. Troy Harsey received the Richard Swantz Leadership Award.
Congratulations. Thank you, Ms. Baumann. The only announcement I have is a reminder for the school board that we will have a coherent governance workshop on January 26th at 6 p.m. in room 209. So please make sure that that is on your calendars. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
I have no announcements for this evening.
Wonderful. We'll move on to agenda planning.
Make a motion to approve the February 6, 2023 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Korberg, seconded by Mr. Spivey, to approve the February 6, 2023 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed? Motion has carried, and we'll move on to board debriefing.
I just want to say that this mic is really beating me today. That today was really good. I think that it's really good to be able to have challenging conversations. Contrary to popular belief, we're not just rubber stamping. We're really questioning and having tough and hard decisions to be made. And it's unfortunate that we're here, but we're here, and we got to do what's best for our students in our district, and our families, and our community. So,
Others?
I appreciated having the information session before the action section, just to be able to hear more voices. I felt like it really opened up space to do that.
I guess I would ask, I let the conversation go, right? Typically, I could have tried to constrain the amount of time we used for that conversation, but I felt that it was important for that conversation to take as long as it needed, for everybody to have questions asked, answers provided, thoughts shared. So my question to the board members is, did you feel comfortable with the amount of time you were given? Did you feel like it could have been cut? Do you feel like it could have gone on longer?
it definitely probably could have went longer, but
I think we all did something we didn't want to do, but we're forced to do with our constraints that we have. And we're trying to do what's best for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, there are going to be repercussions, and some students, it will be a struggle for them, but that's why the supports and the transition will be really important. And I'm thankful for the conversation that we had.
I think it was in Dr. Cooper's letter to the Tribune about the November referendum, where she stated that there's no painless way out of the financial situation that we're in, and that's true. And I just appreciate this group of people that it feels easy to have the tough conversations together, even knowing that we don't always agree on everything. That I think we have hard decisions to make, and I appreciate everybody's openness to considering different angles.
I would just add that, contrary to popular belief, we don't always agree. I think this is a great example in public of us not agreeing, but we don't always agree. We have some, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not heated, but challenging conversations, crucial conversations about topics. And so, like you, Ms. Berkedahl, this has been a phenomenal group to have that conversation with. So thank you all for the hard decisions you had to make today. And with that, we will adjourn, and I'm going to forego the workshop at this point, if that's okay.
You gotta make a motion?
No, I don't think so. But we may need to gather for that conversation in another way, and probably virtually. So just be on the lookout in case you see something from me about having that workshop earlier than the February conversation. Okay? Yes, so with that, thank you so much, everybody, and we are adjourned.
What's the workshop?
We were going to debrief.